Pursuant to the provisions of Section 2.68.030 of the Metropolitan Code of Laws, please take notice that decisions of the Metropolitan Government of Nashville and Davidson County Community Oversight Board may be appealed to the Chancery Court of Davidson County for review under a common law writ of cert. Any appeal must be filed within 60 days after entry of a final decision by the board. Any person or other entity considering an appeal should consult with an attorney to ensure that time and procedural requirements are met. Thank you. And so I'll be reading this at the beginning of each meeting as well. Okay, and so to establish quorum, I'd actually like to go around and do just roll verbally here. And if you could do me a favor, and for all of us, it was brought to my attention, I think this is a good thing to do, to just let the board know how you would like to be addressed. I think for certain spaces I call Mr. or Miss, or some folks say, hey, just call me Matt or Dr. Lewis, but I'd like to ensure that we're all expecting and respecting that space. So with that, I'll go in order here. Ms. Hildred?
Present. And Ms. Hildred is fine. Thank you.
Ms. Marsh?
Present. Danita.
Got it, Danita. Dr. Lewis?
I'm present. You can either call me Adele or Dr. Lewis.
Perfect.
Can I amend?
Yes.
You can call me Phyllis. I thought you were asking for formality. Phyllis is fine.
Okay. Ms. Ross?
Present, just call me Brenda.
Okay. Brenda? Mr. Cooper?
Present, you're trying to call me Bob. I wonder, for purposes of people who are watching this by video, if it's not easier for them to follow if we refer to us by last names rather than first names.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Cooper. Great point. I'll call you Bob and Mr. Cooper and mix it up sometimes. That's okay. Mr. Holloway.
You can call me Walter.
Thank you, Mr. Walter. Yeah. Matt, you told me earlier, so.
Please call me Matt.
Okay. Good.
Jamel.
Good. All right. All right. And Chief Turner.
Present, and I've been called so many things.
I like that. Okay. That's fair and fine. Thank you. Thanks, everyone.
And
So, yeah.
Chair? You?
Chair. Yes, chair. I like that. I'd say chair. Sorry, Ms. Davis is fine too. Thank you. So I want to share a few meetings that I've had since our last convening, and also share out a few notes. I think this will be very important for some of the business we're going to talk about, and also share just a quick revision here. Right after my remarks, I'm going to move number 7 up to number 4 and ask Mr. Ron Coulter to come up and speak to us about the staff office space, and then we'll go in order from there. And so I hope that everyone has seen a copy of the resolution that the executive team came together on behalf of the board and produced. And if you have not, we're happy to send that around again. I will have a bit of time. I believe Marcus is going to share a bit of an update where things stand, but I just want folks to know that we did come together in the spirit of both the community, the board itself, but more importantly, the people, and I think came up and crafted what was embodied a great deal of passion and purpose. And I want to thank Jamel for his leadership in leading this space and having us not come to the meeting with a blank canvas. He really did the due diligence and the time there. So for that, I'm going to call you Mr. Campbell Gooch, because thank you so very much for your work there. I also want to say that I also had a call with Ms. Hall about 2 Fridays, almost a Friday and a half ago, with her and her team about the status of the executive director search. They shared with me both those that were deemed highly qualified and those that were qualified. I may be using the incorrect terms there. And we talked a bit about some of the demographic backgrounds of those individuals, as well as those that were outside of that scope. The good news, I think, is that we are destined to have a highly credible and strong leader in the ED role. I, for one, for obvious reasons, am standing out of it, and and Ms. Ross can share more about that when we get there. And then we also have Jamel as well is going to be working on that. But the good news, I think, is that our HR's team has gone above and beyond to ensure that we have a good slate of candidates, a good diverse slate of candidates, right? And I think that's important to all of us here. Next, I want to talk about the COB email address. And Marcus, have we sent that out yet before?
I have not.
Okay.
That was, yeah.
No, not a problem. Thank you. So IT created a general mailbox for the oversight, for the Community Oversight Board, and we'll get that out right after the meeting, perhaps tomorrow, so that we can start to share that out. I believe that, at least from the chair position, most of y'all are going to be missed for me because it comes off the tongue easy. But Ms. Hildreth, the point you made last meeting about some of the communication you're getting and how to direct those inquiries, it's important that we all have the same space and in a positive line of communication, right? These concerns are valid and important, and we have to have a proper way to bring them together. Marcus will assist us in essentially kind of managing and administering that email account for the short amount of time until we have an executive director, and then we will transition that over to the ED for their review. I plan to actually bring up in the next meeting, really with the executive team, if others want to talk about this, ways we can watch the mailbox in between time, because certainly as soon as we get that out, there are going to be folks who want to have immediate communication, but we'll come back to that. And also I want to point out on the resolution that went out, you'll notice there was a telephone number. I created a temporary number just for, again, for communication purposes. We'll change all of that properly when we have an ED in place. But just for obvious reasons, we have people trying to reach us right now. And it seems like everyone did get back to Marcus with their updated email address, so thank you for that. And then 2 more items. On March 19th, I have a budget meeting that is already scheduled for the afternoon. Now, this is important because when we get down to talking about the regional conference, NACO, I need to just get the board's ideas and influence here about how we want to move forward. There's been a request for us to extend sponsorship funding to the coordinating partners of NACO. It's important also for us to realize where we stand right now when we actually don't have a budget yet. And kind of the sticky position that puts us in, and also for us to understand too, and just for our overview quickly, that the mayor's office has committed $3,000 to NACO, recognizing that we don't have the budget currently, and so more to come on that. We'll talk about this a little later, but I wanted you to know about that meeting. And then last but not least, last Thursday, perhaps, I believe, I had a meeting in the morning, 8 a.m., with the public defender, Judge Marcus. Got to help me out. It was
essentially an ad hoc meeting, and there were department heads and criminal justice stakeholders. So the public defender, the district attorney, Judge Melissa Blackburn is typically a part of that meeting. Chief Hagar with Metro Nashville Police Department, among other people.
Thank you. And so the topic was the body-worn cameras in the current trial that is taking place right now. And again, this was my first meeting, so I was coming into it with fresh ears here, but I just want to run through a few dates and points for the board to be aware of. And then, of course, with the next meeting, I'll have a much more thorough perspective. And also from moving forward, once we have an ED, that person will take on attending those meetings on behalf of the board. First thing to note is that March 11th, so yesterday, was the official end of the trial of the body-worn cameras. I don't have information about how many officers or detectives participated in this. And Marcus, feel free to cut me in if you know any more. I'm just sharing what I know.
That's my world. So the trial phase essentially was about 90 days, wherein 21 officers wore a camera for 30 days apiece, right? So 7 officers wore one camera for 30 days, and then they rotated through that 90-day period. There are 3 vendors that are left at this point, and the next step is to award a contract. Well, the very next step is for the evaluation team to meet and discuss what came out of the trial phase. But then sort of the next big step is to award a contract to one of the vendors, and we look to do that on April the 30th.
Thank you. So the March 19th, like Marcus is talking about, is the evaluation phase. Next meetings to come out of this, there is to be a meeting with, assuming Chief Hager and a few others, to determine the policies around how and when these body cameras will be worn. On behalf of the board, I petition them to ensure that we have an invitation to participate. A member of the board does, and I essentially implore them to understand the importance of the COB being a part of that decision, of those policies being developed, and quite frankly, she told them that it would be important in the sense of transparency also, that the city of Nashville and our communities know that we had their best interests in mind in that meeting. The next conversation was about where and how the videos will be stored. There's conversation about it being cloud-based or otherwise, and that I think also is going to come out of some of these policy meetings. There was also a discussion about where would you view this, right? Would there be a secured link sent out that would then kind of, have a tag, a duration to it, or would you have to go maybe to a designated space in a courthouse? And so that's sort of TBD. However, it seems like, and Marcus, correct me if I'm wrong here, but it sounds like they are leaning towards having secured links sent out. Although it seems like it was kind of in the air, but feel free if you
know. No, I think that's very much to be determined at this point. A lot of that will be driven by the vendor that is selected, and then by the software that is chosen. I think the consensus among the group, again, nothing has been decided yet, but the consensus among the group is that the link being distributed to multiple parties with an expiration date and time might be the best route to go, but again, that's to be determined.
And the last thing I just want to point out is, as we were ending the meeting, again, I went into this not knowing a ton, but knowing enough to keep the board in mind here is how the COB would have access to these videos, right? And so, and how our executive director and their team would be able to properly position themselves to do their jobs. And so I asked them, well, where do we fall in this? How would we gain access? And they said, oh, well, you would go through the district attorney. And I said, well, to be frank with you, that won't work. We as a COB need to act with full autonomy here, right? And we also need to ensure that our executive director is empowered to act without any hindrance whatsoever. And so perhaps this is going to be fleshed out more in the policy, the meetings. I hope I get invited back, but I do think that it's important that they keep in mind that we cannot go through other entities. We can't put our executive director in that position, no matter who they are. And so, yeah, Marcus.
On behalf of Metro and the mayor's office, the Community Oversight Board will absolutely have a representative at every meeting going forward surrounding body cameras. For the most part, I convene those meetings, so I will make sure that the Community Oversight Board is present during those meetings. With regard to the link, specifically, I think that, I'm trying to recall who said it. I believe it was an MNPD representative when you asked the question about how the Community Oversight Board would have access to the footage. I believe whoever that was referring to open cases where there's a criminal investigation. There's certain rules of criminal procedure require or sort of dictate how that information is released. I think that would be the only, that might be the only case where the district attorney would be involved for cases that don't rise to the level of criminal conduct, but might be otherwise defined as misconduct. Certainly, I believe MNPD would be able to provide a link to the executive director, to the investigator investigating the case without having to involve any other third party.
And Mark, this is why we have you. But it sounds to me that's why the policy meetings are so important.
Right, correct.
So that we can get this in black and white and ensure that,
And that's absolutely why the Community Oversight Board will have a representative.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. Right. So with that, that's all the remarks and updates I have. Happy to take any questions there may be. Yes, Ms. Cooper, and then, yeah.
Just to follow up on the tapes, Mr. Dickerson, what is the application of the Public Records Act to those videos?
That's going to be part of the big issue on that. And I think that's probably the reason why there's some pushback on the board just having access to it, because what is confidential within the police department's possession, because it's part of an active investigation, if it shifts over to here, even though everybody wants to be able to view it, it then would become part of the public record. So I think that's part of what we're trying to flesh out is we have, for sure, if it's an ongoing investigation, we know that's an exception to the Public Records Act. But as far as like whether it's, that's something that I think our office is going to have to take a look at. And I don't know if legal is involved in these meetings or not.
Cindy, I believe.
Okay.
Cindy.
If Cindy is, then she's looking at that issue.
If the video is not involved, part of an ongoing investigation, is it a public record?
Well, if it's part of an ongoing investigation,
If it's not part of an ongoing.
if it's not, then arguably it's public record. In which case, that shouldn't be a problem to anything that's going to be a public record. I'm sure that everybody's looking to get that information to you all as soon as possible, because if the public can get it, obviously the Oversight Board should be able to have it. So it's just a matter of whether or not we're protecting it as a non-public record, and if it's sent over here, does it then become a public record? That's the issue we're trying to avoid.
Is that bell tolled, though, if it's only the ED that views?
Well, see, we've talked about the idea of whether, and Mr. Sweeney and I have talked about this too, whether confidentiality agreements could be entered into, and there's not any mechanism by which a confidentiality agreement between COB and, let's say, MNPD would still protect it as a public record. The confidentiality agreement is kind of irrelevant in that sense. So we're trying to address the ins and outs of how to protect information from getting outside the COB, but allow you all to do your job. But it's something we're looking into.
Thank you. Mr. Holloway.
While they developing the policies on wearing these cameras, they need to keep in mind what happened if the officer turned the camera off. Because we have had that to happen here in the United States, and so we don't want anything that happened, then all of a sudden you cut the camera out, and we don't know what happened after that. But it need to be addressed.
Thank you. And to that end, Mark, if you're okay with it, the next meeting, I know we put it on the calendar, but I can't remember the date. But I will send an email out to the board by way of Marcus to ask for any points like this that you want to make sure are raised and we get answers to. And if I get an agenda ahead of time, I'll share that out too with the board, the meeting's permission. So thank you. Anyone else? Mr. Gooch.
My question was kind of on the same length, but what's the timetable as far as having a policy submitted around body cameras? I know we have the 30th is when the contract is supposed to be taken, but what's the policy timetable, if you know?
Let me see if Marcus can help us here, because I didn't hear it.
Essentially, so Dr. Hildreth, you might have to help me here, but there were public meetings surrounding the body camera policy held 2016, a while ago, before I arrived.
Right.
And so this process has been, as far as drafting a policy that sort of inclusive of all thoughts and ideas, has been going on for quite a while. MNPD drafted, I guess, they had to draft a policy for this trial phase for the cameras. And so we will take a look at this meeting on the 19th, I think is the date. Or no, after the 19th. At a future meeting, we haven't said it yet, we will take a look at the policy that was adopted or drafted during the trial phase, and then open that up to recommendations. As far as a set timetable, there is not.
And who would be giving those recommendations?
I mean, so the Community Oversight Board will have a representative there.
Okay.
And again, stakeholders within the criminal justice field. So
Gotcha.
Public Defender Martisa Johnson is always at those meetings. The district attorney is at those meetings. Judges, so forth and so on.
And look, Jamil, I think I hear your point and your questions here, right? We have time to engage the community now, because I think we got at least a month before that next meeting, maybe 3 weeks or so, before that next follow-up meeting. And so we can talk about it as an executive team, or if we want to find a way to engage, because we don't have those committees up and running yet, to find ways to bring in the outside in. But that's the very reason why I wanted to give a full breadth view of what happened, right? So that we can be prepared to come in there with the community's voice in hand, right? Thank you. Anyone else? Okay. Yes, absolutely.
Well, we're talking about having access to the video. Are we talking about doing a criminal investigation or doing a departmental investigation by OPA?
I thought that we really just talked about the criminal investigation, but does it include also departmental, Marcus? So we only discussed criminal as far as I was concerned on.
Yeah, I think that too will warrant further discussion.
I can add it to my.
There hasn't been a determination made there.
I'll add that to my list.
And I'll have to say that a lot of these types of decisions were kind of left open because of this board, so this board would have a voice in sort of crafting what that looked like.
I could also say that when we were drafting the bylaws and we were looking at materials from other boards across the country, we ended up looking at rules as well. And a number of those rules kind of address more broadly the investigations and the timing of investigations by an organization like ours, depending on whether there's a criminal prosecution going on or another investigation by another body. Okay. So all of those issues beyond whatever is in the policy having to do with the body cameras themselves would likely be addressed, at least as to us in our rules, as to how we envision we should be doing things and the timing of what's going on. For example, when there's a criminal investigation, there may be things that we can't do because to go out and interview people might actually be considered improper, illegal conduct of interfering with an ongoing criminal investigation. So there's a number of different issues that all kind of overlap each other and touch each other more broadly than just the access to the body cameras and the recordings of those as well.
Thank you. Sylvia?
Thank you. Continuing to think about how we create good process that makes sure that the diverse expertise and perspectives on this board are, infused in every step of this. I'm wondering out loud how we rotate representation from this board at that particular meeting, so that sometimes there is a community voice that's in there and listening to the issues, and sometimes there's prior police voice in there listening to the issues, and the way in which we always come back together as a board to hear and discuss this together is at our board meeting, so that we don't have to, we just have one and have them rotate. We're not going to trip the open meetings rule, impose that on their meeting. But I do think, as I'm listening, I'm hearing Member Turner's question. I wouldn't even know to ask that, but it raises things, and I'm wondering how we do that.
That's a good point. I think, so Ms. Hildred, I take your point. Only sticky part, I guess, is that there's so much content. Like I myself am reading, I don't even know what this document is that they sent me the other day. And the Open Meetings Act makes it a little different here. But I take the point, and I always love the idea of shifting responsibilities because, again, your eyes and ears are going to be different than mine. Are there suggestions to this? Because, and Marcus, let me know too. I mean, do other spaces kind of shift out their representation, or are we just, because we might just be the most unique?
We're different.
Yeah, we're different. That's true. That's
I
true.
mean, you absolutely are, and
Yeah.
I think, you know, if there were an executive director for this board,
That would handle it.
then they would participate in all of these, and the idea is that they will participate in criminal justice planning, criminal justice steering, all those meetings going forward. However, I think your point, Madam Chair, is valid, that a lot of times there's so much substance that goes in to these meetings, a lot of conversations. I fill notebooks on top of notebooks with information that it would be difficult to sort of, for one board member to convey that information to the next board member.
I was just making a comment to Marcus that we're well on track. You'll get that update shortly to, at your next meeting, have your finalists in front of you for you to select an executive director. So hopefully this is a finite amount of time at least to solve for. So if we're thinking about maybe the next 6 weeks, how that rotation cycle could be, because hopefully we'll have someone who will start in about 6 weeks' time would be our hope, depending on how quickly. But we've asked the finalists how quickly they can start, because we knew that was of urgency to the board as well. So assuming that there are 2, 3, 4 of those maybe in the next 6 or 7 weeks, maybe we can figure out a finite way for you all to rotate those.
Thank you, Ms. Hall. Ms. Silver.
Thank you. So perhaps one idea is for us to move to create a task force of 3 members, the chair, a community member, and one of our members with prior law enforcement experience, to be the ones where you can meet together, the 3 of you, at a notice meeting and decide which of you will go to, if there are 2 or 3,
Absolutely.
or possibly 4 meetings until the ED is stood up. You know, different ones go, and then you can come back at your notice meeting and have that together. I feel the need to think about a process like this, particularly in light of the legislation, proposed legislation is pending at the state level. And I know that there were other members who were present in the chamber on the Hill of the Senate Judiciary meeting last week, and listening to the types of questionings that go forward. I am anxious for us to continue to dispel the notion that this board is partisan and is only viewing it from the side of community, or wants to bash the police, etc., and to make sure that we represent our unique diversity in this particular policy-making arena, and to be seen to be doing so seems to be important for all of us. And that is the thrust behind my recommendation. Thank you.
Any additional thoughts, comments? So we are, to date, there's only 2 meetings, or 1, that is on the calendar. It is for mid, or maybe first week of April, mid or first week of April. We will come back as a board before that meeting occurs, okay? And I'll be honest with you, though, the next meeting, we're going to be knee-deep in our finalists, and so there will be literally 2 things on here: call to order and let's go, right? And so, but if in my short remarks, maybe the only thing I will share out is that, we've identified, and I asked the members of the board who have with prior law enforcement experience to reach out to Marcus and or to share tonight if you'd be interested in participating in the next meeting. I'm happy to, we can have a open, another meeting that's public to the, open to the public, where I just give you all the information I have and arm you with the tools, you need to be successful there. And or I'm happy to attend this next meeting, and then after that, we will have an ED, and then that person can be partnered with another member of the board to attend, right? And so it could be the new ED and then another member of the board, and we can switch out from there and have that representation. And that might be the easiest way to do things, but I will keep in mind to add this back because I think these points I take them very well as well. So thank you to everyone here. With that, we'll move forward, and I ask Mr. Coulter, Mr. Ron Coulter, to join us up here, if you don't mind. Take a seat there next to Mr. Holloway, and to discuss the staff space, office space.
I'm Ron Coulter with Metro Nashville Public Property. We're in the finance department, and we're responsible for dealing with leases and land acquisitions and various other real estate transactions. About a month ago, I met with Ashley and Marcus and Elizabeth Swinson from General Services, and we toured space at Parkway Towers we had identified we thought might be good for the director and the staff. And I think after reviewing the space, everybody's in agreement that it did make sense. There's space on the 11th floor that's about 3,560 square feet plus or minus. That is available now. We'd have to retrofit the space and get it built out. But one of the things that's attractive as far as timing and everything worked out, Parkway Towers also has space on the 18th floor that they will allow us to use at no charge during the time we're getting the lease negotiated, getting approved through council, and doing the build out on that space. So, and they will not charge anything for that space for that period of time. So in a perfect world, I called the leasing agent today and asked him to get started on the lease. And we're talking about a rate in the range of $22 a square foot. We would have a tenant improvement build-out allowance of $25 a square foot. The lease would be for a 5-year term, and we would have an option to, if we needed to or wanted to get out after 3 years by just paying unamortized tenant improvement costs and lease commissions, which is pretty standard. I think it's a good location for the board, proximity to the public square, the courts, everybody, and all downtown accessible. We have done leases with Parkway Towers in the past. They have a good document we've utilized, so that will facilitate the time. So if we can get that done in the next couple of weeks, I'll go ahead and get on the agenda for the council approval, and we have to have 3 readings of council to get the lease approved. And during that time, we can be working on the drawings and getting the permits ready to start spending money to do the retrofit and build out the space. One thing I mentioned that typically when you do these leases, as I said, they give us a $25 a square foot allowance, which in this case would amount to about $88,000 to use to build out the space. But, and I don't know when the budget's going to be addressed here, but you know what it might do is just have a margin of maybe another 20%, just if we ran over that tenant improvement allowance, depending on getting the space. I just thought I'd throw that out there as something we ought to consider. Mm-hmm. But it's a pretty simple process. Just get the lease done. And again, the fact that we've done leases at Parkway Towers, they're used to Metro's idiosyncrasies, and I think that ought to go smoothly. So I just, Ashley and Marcus wanted me to come and just at least give you that overview and what the process is going to amount to. And if you got any questions, I'd be happy to answer them and just go from there.
Thank you, Mr. Coulter. Any questions? Thoughts? Anyone suddenly excited to design, like I asked last meeting, and nobody wanted to do it? That's okay. If not, I'll be in there retrofitting with the best of them. I appreciate you coming to join us, Mr. Coulter. We're very excited. I didn't know they were going to give us a space for no cost, but that's incredibly generous of them.
Well, the only thing they would do, if we, for some reason, the long-term lease wasn't approved, they'd want to charge us something for it, but I don't think that's going to be an issue there.
Okay.
So
that's great.
So that's great to have that flexibility timing-wise, so we're not trying to be, pigeonholed somewhere until the lease is built out. So
right.
From a timing standpoint, being in the same building, just a different floor, and get that space done the way the board would like to have it done.
Great. And on the timing of the 18th floor, the temporary space, we're looking to identify ID, by the end of this month. And so, when would they be able to, have desk and space ready for that person to begin in April? We hope.
I'll defer to Elizabeth on that to see, but
Okay.
The space is there now, as you saw,
Okay.
so I think go in, whatever we need to do to make sure to get the furniture in there. So we will work with General Services to make that happen.
Okay, perfect. All
And
right.
then I guess I would ask the board to just communicate with her on exactly, where the furniture is going and so forth, and I know she's going to be working on that. So.
Okay, for furniture, okay, great. Right. Thank you, Mr. Coulter. We appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you for your time.
Oh, I'm sorry. Someone had Mr. Holloway has a question.
Yes,
I apologize.
that's gonna be our space, and going in that building, it would be nice if we had something called ID pictures, so they know who we are when we come in and out the building.
Do they use that? I don't know much about Parkway Towers. I'm assuming there's elevators and key cards, or?
Well, obviously, the elevator, as far, they have reception desk when you come into the lobby, I know. So as far as any access cards or whatever you do, maybe that'd be the person to check in with that, you know, we're in for community oversight board meeting or having some meeting upstairs. So I'm sure we can work that out.
Yeah.
That's just an accommodation. They'd be happy to make sure.
Well, the main thing, just different ones coming in at a different time at the meeting, they will at least know who we are.
Right.
So we don't have no question, no strangers walking up in the building, 'cause everybody don't know us.
Right. I think what we would do, or I would suggest, is maybe have a sheet or two made up, everybody's picture and name, and can leave that with the person that's downstairs. And I think it's pretty much the same person all the time, who would then get familiar with everybody and know who is who and where you're going.
Okay. Fantastic. Thank you, Mr. Ross. Ms. Ross.
You enter through the parking garage, right?
Yep.
Correct.
And you can get right on the elevator
Right.
to that Pacific floor. It's the most scariest building I've seen. I was in there the other day. It's the parking's, I mean, people
dark.
speeding past me. It's dark, and then I'm just concerned about parking.
Well, another option would be, obviously, is to park, there's parking outside that's a paid lot, so, and/or on the street, so that's another option. I know when I went and we had the meeting, that's what I did that day, rather than parking the garage. So,
That's a good point, though. Mr. Holloway, do you have another?
Oh, I'm sorry.
Okay. Nope. Okay. All right. Thank you, Mr. Coulter. We appreciate it. Thank you. All right. Next on our agenda is the Community Oversight Board Committees. I really only want to make a statement here and see if the board supports me. Because we are so close to having our ED in place, unless something changes, right, something insurmountable changes, I'd like to hold until we have our ED in place to determine what committees we stand up in the need. I also think that it would be important that ED have some conversation and input there. And so unless the board has, there are dissenting opinions here, I'd like to just table this for a future conversation. Anyone feel differently?
Can you
Yeah.
kind of speak more about the topic that we're tabling? Can you
Yeah,
just speak
so
more on it?
at the last meeting, I asked the board if there were thoughts about the different types of committees that we should look to stand up. I, for one, thought it would be a good idea that we have some type of youth engagement committee. I think for obvious reasons, we want to have some level of, maybe we want to talk about something that's just community focused and oriented. I don't know quite what it looks like yet, but I asked folks to give me some ideas of what they were thinking, and now, just over the last 2 weeks, I thought, this is something that the ED should certainly have a strong amount of input on, because they are certainly going to be helping us lead this. And then from there, I assume that we would at least have representation by the board on each one of these committees, so maybe, one or two of us. So that's what we're talking about.
And this might be moving the conversation ahead a little bit, but should we still address the standing committees in the bylaws? Should that still be something that we're conversating around?
I think so. I mean, I think so, and the language is there, and I saw Mr. Martinez give me the eye here, too. So I'm not getting ahead of that. I just think that, of course, we just need to keep some flexibility when it comes to the ED. But I totally agree with you. I saw him from the corner of my eye there.
Yeah,
Mr. Martinez.
It's in there.
It's in there.
Given the conversation we had about body camera policy, should we attempt to formulate some type of policy committee now instead of waiting until the next meeting or until the executive director is on?
So I think that's very much similar to what Ms. Hildreth was saying, or is it? It sounds very similar to it. The board would like to do that. I'm open to it. I have no negative feelings about that at all. I think the more we can collaborate, the better. It's just a matter of who has the capacity and is willing to step up to the plate. So, and also, I mean, we would have to take a vote here to make it happen. Mr. Sweeney.
Yeah, as we're talking about policies, I think it would be good to maybe broaden the committee and make it kind of rules and process and policies to kind of pull all of those together. And I think that it would be best to have a diverse group, so more than 3 people on that. There's going to be a lot of stuff to look at and a lot of stuff to think about when we put together those. The executive director will play a key role in the development of those policies and practices, particularly if she or he has extensive previous experience other places and can help to figure out, what has worked practically rather than theoretically. And so I do think that it would be good to have that kind of committee, and I just think it needs to be broad and include the executive director.
Okay.
5 or 6 people maybe on the committee.
Well, do I hear a motion, or is it,
I'll make a motion.
Okay, Mr. Sweeney?
I move that we set up a policies, rules, and procedure committee that have approximately 5 members of diverse backgrounds among the board.
For your second?
Yeah, I'll second it.
Focused discussion? Ms. Hildred?
Thank you. I will just clarify that my earlier remarks were responding to the exigency of the specific conversation around body cameras, and I was trying to offer something that was compact and nimble along the lines of what we did to be able to craft the statement to submit in opposition to the legislation. So I just wanted to clarify my earlier conversation. I am in support of this Rules and Procedures Committee. I also hear it's being a different thing than what I was urging earlier. Thank you.
Any additional, Mr. Sweeney? Mr. Campbell? Dr. Lewis?
Was your motion specifically to make that a standing committee?
No.
Mr. Campbell Lewis?
My question is for Professor. What can you speak more on the differences in what you were talking about earlier and what Mr. Sweeney kind of proposed?
Sure. I was proposing that we be able to have an entity, and I'm thinking because when we did what we did before, we did it a task force. It was a task force of 1. And I think it was urged on me by a fellow member that a task force created something that was only purpose specific and then would go away. So I really was thinking about a task force, and I was responding to the fact that we needed to have in that room with the other criminal justice group equal representation from our committee, meaning that we're honoring law enforcement experienced members and members with other community sensitivities. I don't want to be binary, but those are the 2 binaries I thought of. And to include the chair, since at this point, in lieu of an ED, she is the glue going together. So the smallest and most nimble unit I could think of for this particular issue were 3 members for that reason. I understand, Mr. Sweeney can help me, that the rules and procedures are a little bit larger to be able to respond to that and other things that we're standing up, which I think is very important and which I think it would be helpful to have even before we have an ED. So I would view that as the one exception to the chair's request to hold off. I am in support of this motion. And that is how I see it different than my earlier urgings.
Okay, thank you.
Dr. Lewis?
I just have a little more discussion on your motion, which was why not make that a standing committee?
There's no particular reason not, except I was thinking that this would probably pretty much run its course, just kind of like the Bylaws Committee. I wouldn't expect the Bylaws Committee to exist beyond the next couple meetings, because they would come up with a set of bylaws and we would adopt them, and then if we wanted to make changes to the bylaws, we could set up another committee or a task force or whatever to look at it. The fact that we have no rules or policy or whatever, I was thinking of it as the same sort of way as a temporary committee that would get things organized, get things running, and then going forward, probably most of the changes to the rules will be coming from the executive director, proposed up to us rather than through a committee. That was my thought process, but I'm not saying that's correct. I'm just saying that was my thought process.
I was just asking what
Yeah,
thought process.
yeah.
I'm not trying to imply
No,
that
no,
it was
no,
incorrect
not at all,
either.
not at all. I don't take it
I
that,
would,
I don't take it that way at all.
I would foresee that actually we might need to have a standing committee with that title, because I think there are probably going to be issues coming up a lot in the future that would need to be addressed by such a committee. That's just for consideration. I'm just talking.
Yeah. Either way, it makes no difference. I was just thinking defer a lot of that to an executive director once we got going.
Mr. Dickerson.
I'll point out that that other boards, commissions, and departments oftentimes will have a bylaws committee that is a standing committee that will review it annually for any changes. Little things happen in the bylaws. That could be done separately from rules, but oftentimes the bylaws committees in different groups are standing committees.
Okay. Any additional discussion? No? Mr. Cooper.
I think it makes sense to form this committee. I do think that rules and procedures are different from the bylaws. The bylaws govern how we operate as a board. The rules and procedures are going to govern how the staff of the board operates. So I do think it's important that the executive director have significant input. I think it's good perhaps to get a mechanism there for the executive director to work toward, but I don't think we ought to push this in order to have something in place before we have an executive director. I don't think we need policies and procedures right now because we don't have anything going through those policies and procedures. So I guess that would be my suggestion with regard to this.
My thought would be that it's going to be harder to come up with the rules and policies than it was to come up with the bylaws. And therefore, it's probably worthwhile to set up a committee now to start that process. It might also lead to a determination that there's things that we should tweak in the bylaws as we go through and identify the rules, because there's a certain overlap between the two, because the rules will also have to do with the relationship between the staff and the board, and therefore there may be other things we want to tweak in the bylaws. So I think it would be a good idea to start with the committee, but I don't think the rules should be finalized until the executive director is very much involved in the process.
Mr. Ross.
Who are you thinking the 5 members would be?
I have no idea, but I would just volunteer from the involvement with the bylaws. I'd be more than glad to be involved on the rules side as well. But I'm just saying I'd be willing. But other than that, I hadn't thought who, other than all components of the board should be represented in that process.
Any additional discussion? Okay. Mr. Sweeney, it was your motion. Would you mind repeating it and we can take a vote?
Yes. I propose that we establish a rules and procedures committee of the board with a broad representation of the board of approximately 5 members or so.
Thank you. And seconded by Dr. Lewis. Okay. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, nay. Any abstentions?
I'm going to abstain because I don't know what I think yet.
Yeah, me too.
Okay. Dr. Lewis and Ms. Ross abstain. And so let me do this again. So all those in favor, please say aye. Aye. All those opposed, please say nay. And abstentions?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
2. And so that's that passes, right?
Correct.
Incorrect? Okay, the motion passes. Thank you. Let's see if we can do, this might be smooth and easy. Or do we have 5 people that would like to volunteer? Heard Mr. Sweeney, Matt volunteer. Anyone else have interest? Ms. Marsh, thank you. Mr. Martinez. Dr. Lewis, I'm assuming that
I
red
guess I'll
means...
figure out what I think.
That's the best way sometimes. Just go knee deep. And then, is that 4 or is that 5? It's 1, 2, 3, 3, 4.
No, 4.
That's 4.
Yeah, Mr. Sweeney, Ms. Marsh, Dr. Lewis, Mr. Martinez, and anyone else like to complete the basketball team? Ms. Ross. Excellent.
We'll
Thank
figure
you.
it out together. Right.
Yeah, fantastic. Thank you for your leadership there. Thank you to the board, too. It's incredible. So I do ask that the committee, if you could please find time to meet prior to the next meeting, that'd be helpful. And I will do my very best to get, if you have any questions at all, please, use our very dutiful and perfect messenger, Mr. Floyd here, who'll get it my way. And if there's any materials I can share, I will as well. Mr. Dickerson.
You might want to go ahead and just do a motion to accept the slate and have everybody vote for the appointments.
Absolutely. Okay. Could someone make a motion, please?
So moved. I move to accept the slate of the 5 members for this Rules and Procedures Committee.
Thank you. And a second, Mr. Cooper seconds, as well as Mr. Chief Turner here. Any discussion? Okay. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Any opposed? Nay. Abstentions? The motion passes. Thank you. Thank you very much. Next on our agenda, sorry for the jumping around, but I'd like to acknowledge our guests here today. Ms. Hall, if you wouldn't mind coming up, I'd love to have the conversation about the executive director. And I promise we're going to get to our bylaws, but I want to be thoughtful of our guests.
Thank you. And Ms. Ross, do you want me to volley it to you? You want me to start?
You can start.
Okay. So the good news is that we are on track. As Chair Davis mentioned, we did have a conversation this Friday before the posting closed. We felt like we had a number of viable candidates to move forward and talked a little bit about the candidates we saw in queue. We ranked these candidates. Like I said, we do this day in, day out. Last year, we reviewed and ranked 28,000 applications and resumes for positions all over Metro. So this is something our team is a pretty well-oiled machine on, looking at both minimum qualifications per the job posting that you all approved at the meeting before, and then the preferred qualifications, and then really looking at the duties and the experience that each candidate had. So we had essentially 4 different buckets of candidates. We had highly qualified, that's our top group, well qualified, so not quite as high, but definitely well qualified, just regular qualified, and then we did have a disqualified section. Simply on the disqualified, they simply did not meet just on the minimum requirements, so they didn't have the year's experience. I will note that I feel like there were a number of candidates in that space that are very relevant to the work that you're doing. They just didn't have the experience necessary to be the executive director. So I do want to acknowledge that both for the board and for the viewing public, because I definitely wanted to encourage those people to apply because they may be great candidates for our other positions. So once we had the group, we met with Ms. Ross last Thursday, and we took a look at the top 2 rungs of candidates because we had plenty. Look back at Wanda to hopefully keep me honest. We probably reviewed somewhere in the neighborhood of 20 candidates, you think, Ms. Ross? In the highly qualified, well-qualified group?
6.
There were 14. 14 total.
Total.
That's right, there were 6
and 8.
6 and 8. So we looked at those candidates to try to make sure, with a fresh set of eyes with Ms. Ross and myself, to make sure, did we get this right? Which one should we advance for the interview panel that Mr. Campbell Gooch is going to serve on? I'm very happy to report, I hope Ms. Ross feels the same way. I felt like it was a super productive meeting. I felt like Ms. Ross was completely same page, and we did make some tweaks to those candidates as to who was probably most highly qualified and should advance, and those that maybe should shift back down to the well-qualified section. So I felt like there was complete consensus with the candidates that we felt needed to advance to the interview panel. Do you feel the same?
Same.
So with that, we narrowed to the top 5. And we felt really good about the 5 that we did advance. I feel like there was a natural break for those 5 and then the next layer of candidates. Just so that you know, the candidates that are advancing to the interview panel, as we reviewed, we have 4 males, 1 female. Our ethnicity, we have 3, and these are all self-identified by the candidates, 3 identified as white or Caucasian, 2 identified as black or African American. We have 1 in-state candidate. We have 4 out-of-state candidates. We definitely committed to you and very much intended to do a national search. I am happy to report that for the first time in my experience, this position reached international. And I don't mean just with 1 candidate, and I don't mean in North America. So we got, and they were pretty compelling candidates. Neither one of those candidates we felt necessarily rose to that highly qualified group, so we didn't have the administrative challenges of figuring out how to do that. But I did want to report that as an interesting measure because we've done a lot of executive searches in Metro in the past 1.5 to 2 years, and that was really compelling to see that we had people from a person from the Middle East and 1 from Australia. So we definitely got a broad reach, and like I said, with our candidates that are advancing, we only have 1 in-state candidate that is actually advancing to the interview panel. And just as a point of reference, one of those is a veteran of our one moving forward. So that's another component that we also track. Yes, sir.
Yeah, that 1 in-state candidate, is he from Nashville? I mean, is that person from Nashville?
I think from the greater Nashville area off the top of my head, but I think he might live in Franklin.
Franklin.
And is there a way to, because, I think, let's say a year ago, if I'd applied for this job, I'd be considered an out-of-state candidate. But I am a native Nashvilleian, right? And so I just wonder if there's a way we can also ensure we're asking them about if they have any tie back to the Nashville community and what that is.
And on some of their resumes, it was a collection back to
great.
Nashville.
Yes.
Okay, great.
Either through education, and some of that Lentz kind of suggested maybe even grew up here, started undergrad here, then grew and got graduate degrees.
Okay.
We have people that absolutely are doing this work in significant counties in the United States. So that was very impressive. There were a couple that really piqued, I think, Ms. Ross and my interest especially. So we absolutely think we have our executive director in this group. I think the other positive thing to report is that I feel fairly strongly that we have some strong candidates, both for I would say for the next 3 positions we're getting ready to drop, ironically, the assistant director, the senior legal advisor, and investigator. We had some folks that were really significant in that space that's also in this population. We will plan on actively recruiting in the population we got for the executive director that you all don't select. We plan to actively recruit them for our other positions so that they know, sorry, it's okay if you didn't get to this one, but we are interested in you as a candidate because there were some other compelling candidates. So I think we're good to go. The best news is the next step has already been finalized. So next Monday, Mr. Campbell Gooch is going to join us. We have an interview panel that'll be convening in our office. They're going to meet for the majority of the day interviewing the candidates, I believe, starting at 8 a.m. With a brief interview panel orientation just to kind of go through what you can and can't ask. Just so you know, we plan on doing that exact same exercise with you briefly at the beginning of your next meeting as well when we bring the finalists. We've already told the top 5 candidates that after the interview panel, if they are selected to move forward, they need to go on and clear their schedule for March 26th. So I anticipate that the interview panel will come to consensus and then advance where they see that natural break to happen. I envision that to be somewhere either 2, 3, or 4 people advance. But I think you'll feel that and you'll know this is where that natural break occurs and these are the people that should advance to the full committee. And I assume Mr. Campbell Gooch will probably feel the same. So with that, we are on target to bring you top finalists at your next meeting. And we have a very large ask that you clear a significant amount of time for that to be the bulk of the discussion. We're happy to meet you where we need to be met. So if you feel like you need to tweak the meeting time to either be earlier in order to accommodate for this, depending on candidates, I anticipate probably 45 minutes a candidate. You probably want 15 minutes to be able to deliberate and kind of debrief for a moment. And with a small orientation, I'm kind of anticipating about an hour a candidate. So with that, it could easily be, I'm anticipating probably right at 3 hours that we would need. But assuming that the board may have other business, I wanted to make sure that as long as you can tell me where it is and what time you want to start, we can make sure that everything is accommodated for. And just so you know, all candidates we've already coordinated accommodations for candidates for interviews. We will also be coordinating accommodations for finalists when they come back. So this is not imposing on the finalists that are coming forward. Metro will be paying via a budget that you will eventually get flight details for those that need it, and then hotel accommodations for those that need it.
Thank you. Okay, so Ms. Hall, have you ever convened a board in this way to, is this the first time, and do you have recommendations here about, okay.
Just that we can accommodate you, but we do a board selection on a fairly regular basis. Metro is a very board and commission-driven government. I mean, we have 70 boards and commissions, a number of which select their executive director, so this model is not that unusual for us. So for example, the Parks Board selected the Parks Director, et cetera. Planning Commission, Planning Director, we've done that, both of those in the past 2 years. Those are just examples, but we're this model is not that unusual. It will be a publicly noticed meeting. My offer still stands, and absent that, we will continue to try to look for ways. If you'd like to send potential interview questions directly to me, we will work internally. I suspect that a number of questions may be duplicative, so we can help to kind of narrow those. We also want to make sure, I think there'll be some balance on what we ask at the interview panel and what we ask at the board level. I think there should be some overlap there so that the board has the benefit of hearing some answers that Mr. Campbell-Gooch had. So we want to be mindful about all of that. Our team is working right now and has done initial drafts on potential questions for the interview panel already. But I think that's up to the board. If the board, after a brief orientation, wants to have maybe your rules committee drafts the interview questions. I mean, there's certain things you can and cannot ask. We're happy to advise on that. That's part of what that board orientation will look like. You'll want to be consistent about how you ask questions between finalists, but you want enough flexibility that if somebody says something compelling, you can kind of dig into that experience or part of that view that they bring. So we can accommodate that a number of ways, but today I have not received any potential interview questions from any board members.
Is there a one-pager that you might be able to share ahead of our next meeting just to give us an understanding of what we can and can't ask? I know that you'll share that, or maybe it's good for us to have that in mind before we get here. Mr. Campbell-Gooch and then Mr. Martinez.
I was going to suggest we kind of do it the same way we did when it came to drafting the preemption. Maybe have an executive committee meeting to where we can kind of talk and we can kind of get a feel for what other people that's on the executive committee think about the interview process, so I can walk in there with as much information as I possibly can when it comes to representing this board on the panel.
Okay. I'm certainly open to it, but your meeting's on Monday at 8, right?
Yes.
Okay, then you might be hanging out with me this weekend. So. But I'm open to, actually, I fly out tomorrow. I don't know why I said that. But the rest of the board, certainly, if they're available, and I'm happy to dial in if that's permissible, too. Mr. Martinez.
Is there any way that we could get the application materials of the top candidates in advance of these interviews to prepare our questions that we then submit? Or if not, by when will we get them so that we can actually be prepared for our interviews with them? So it's not like we get it on Sunday and we have the board meeting on Tuesday.
We can totally get you finalist applications and resumes absolutely in advance. We will know that, my hope, is the close of business next Monday.
Okay.
So that's when we'll know who our finalists are that are coming to, and we can absolutely facilitate that. But we're We're literally working at warp speed, so we're working like literally week by week. So we absolutely plan to get that to you in advance, and I can absolutely get the finalist applications, resumes, and supplemental questions to all board members in advance of the meeting so that you can digest those before you start interviewing candidates.
Could we get the top?
May I add one thing? After the interview panel on Monday and the finalists are selected, we do run background and credit reference checks on those candidates. It can take a little time for those to come back before we would move their information forward because there may something come up that would disqualify them. So I wanted to let you know about that.
Okay.
Thank you.
Let me ask you a question. You say you do a credit check on them. And now they could be a most intelligent person, be good for us, but for your credit, that can happen. Your school background could have a problem, not paying school all on time. It can make your credit bad. That don't mean you're not a good candidate.
Agreed. And I'll say this, the background check that will be performed for the candidates is standard for every Metro department head. Mm-hmm. They are managing multi-million-dollar budgets. So while it doesn't happen often, most everybody meets an acceptable level of background typically at this level. I will say there have been a few times when that has not been the case. But more often than not, most everyone goes through. But I think it's worth noting that this is the standard background check that Ms. Waits has been through, that I have been through, but every Metro department head, especially when they are in charge of a budget, is required. So it's not going to be any more or any less than what is standard across the board for anyone leaving the Metro department.
Yeah, well, a lot of times people need a job to get their credit straight, So if you hadn't had a good job pertaining to something like this right here, then you pay as you go.
Right. I will say, speculating, the level of candidates that we're looking at, I'm not anticipating a problem. Mm-hmm. I mean, these are people that were the five that Ms. Ross and I looked at were pretty impressive and relevant in the space. So I'm not necessarily anticipating that we're going to run into any issues.
Can I make a request? If we get to when we get to this point, of, by chance we have an anomaly here, and so we run a credit check and something does flag, a serious flag, could you reach out to me so that we can have a conversation about that before we fully disqualify the candidate?
Absolutely.
Okay.
And I just want to add too that if when we get that back, if we look at it and say, for example, it's something that was default or something like that, we call the candidate and we talk with them and we give them an opportunity to explain and tell us what it's all about. And that has happened on many occasions. And after the conversation, it totally makes sense, and we move them forward. So I didn't want you to think that just because something comes up on the credit check, we can say no. Mm-hmm. We talk through it, and then we have a conversation with the candidate.
Yeah, a lot of times children come out of college, and they get these credit cards while they're in there, and then, they get behind, stuff like that, so the credit score is low. And so they need an opportunity.
We don't look at credit scores. We don't look at credit scores. We look at, are you defaulting on loans? You have borrowed money, you're never going to. We're not necessarily looking at, people fall behind on a couple of credit card payments or a couple of car payments. That's not the kind of thing we're gleaning for. We're gleaning for, I borrowed $50,000 and I defaulted on my loan. Or, so know that we're not looking at credit scores at all. That's not there. And frankly, some of that timing comes into play, right? When you look at someone's experience, you go, well, look at the timing of this. This happened, 10 years ago. And again, when we're speaking with the candidate, because that's totally true, we typically, if we see something that looks odd, we contact the candidate first and give them the benefit of doubt and help them provide some context so that we better understand, this is the situation. And I really do I think it's totally appropriate for us to reach out if we have questions. If it's enough to satisfy, I think we just advance them.
Great.
Well, you could default, depends on the crisis that you've gone through.
Completely agree.
It could be something with your parents, or like a terminal illness, or that type of thing.
Absolutely.
So you need a chance to better yourself when you get one of these jobs right here.
I completely agree. And like I said, typically these are easily explained or once or twice, grave enough that it's very clear cut. I mean, I don't anticipate any issues.
I just wanted to add one more thing, again, just in the spirit of transparency. We also, in those credit checks, it comes back if the person has had excessive speeding tickets or reckless driving or any of those types of things as well. And again, we will contact the candidate and have them explain it. So it's a very thorough check of all those aspects. And so we will certainly reach out to you.
And thank you. I think we should both thank you for going beyond what the computer spits out, right? Because there, each and every one of us, there's a story behind it. And I appreciate Mr. Holloway's points here as well. And that's why I'd love for you to just keep me in the loop here, something like that. Hopefully none of this is even relevant to our candidates here, but I certainly appreciate it. We want to be thoughtful here. I'm going to go to Dr. Lewis, Mr. Cooper, and then I'll come back to Mr. Holloway.
I just have a quick question about the background check. I've had this experience in the past. How far back does it go? Because I have hired people in the past and the background check only went back 7 years and they had already served their time and that was gone. So how far back does that go? Do you guys know?
I don't know off the top of my head. We had one experience I'm aware of, kind of a similar experience, but it captured it on the background check.
See, we missed this. It turned up on the sexual offender list, and someone happened to find it after the person was in our employ. So that was a concern, as you might imagine.
Well, and this is obviously this level of background check is a stepped-up version. So, I mean, we paid kind of more for a premium version, depending on the nature of the job you have. And as a department head or somebody who is in charge of, you know, tax funds and has complete autonomy to it, you know what? They're going to get a much more serious background check. Most of our employees go through something that is way more basic, that just says, like, because, again, people need second, third, and fourth chances, and we employ everybody in Metro, which is great. But I think...
I don't know about that.
I think for this particular position, the most stringent that you could get would probably be advisable for this particular position.
Agreed, and my recollection is it's fairly stringent.
Let me say
Cooper,
something about the speeding
one moment,
ticket.
Mr. Holloway. One moment, Mr. Cooper, and then we'll come to Mr. Holloway.
I wanted to follow up on Mr. Martinez's line of questioning, because I think it's important to get this done quickly, but it's also important that the board have enough time to assess the information and be ready to conduct meaningful interviews. So there'll be interviews with the panel next Monday, where this list will be shortened. Then I understand there will be background checks, and those background checks will have to be completed or plan to be completed before the names are transmitted to us along with the information. Is that what I understand was the process? And if so, how long does it take to do a background check?
So that's typically how this process works. We might need to be a little more flexible considering the time.
Okay, so can we get the information on the panelists, on the candidates who come out of the panel immediately after the panel? That would give us a week to look at it, with the understanding that they might not all come before us.
Right.
I mean, I don't want to upset the normal process,
no.
but I think either we need to build more time into this, or we need to get the information on a timely basis that we can fully analyze.
I completely agree with the timely basis component. I agree with everything you said, but the timely basis component I think is important for you to digest it. And it's not, again, we're talking about 2 or 3, 4 candidates, probably 3. It won't be an inordinate amount to digest, which is the good part. I think reasonably, if we had things to you by Wednesday, because again, we'll have a full day Monday and hopefully start the background checks in the afternoon. We're then going to have to compile this information so that you can actually go through it, right? So if we can get this information to you on Wednesday, and to the extent we've gotten some background checks back, great. And then if we need to, hopefully everybody advances, we don't have any issues. If we need to reach out to Ms. Davis, we can. And then shortly before we begin the process, we can let you know that a candidate may not be moving forward. I will say, sometimes those candidates, and I have found more likely than not, that depending on the background check or whether we typically don't have to make the hard decision. Either it's serious enough that the person wants to excuse themselves out of the process, which they have a right to do. And we've seen that happen a couple of times because we said, look, this could become part of the discussion. This could be discoverable we want to make sure you know that going in. And so typically from there, people tend to make a decision that they're comfortable and appropriate with. So I think we could probably do that, just get the background check started. And then on Wednesday, figure out a way to facilitate getting the binders of information to you on those finalist candidates. And then as quickly as possible, confirming whether we have any issues with Ms. Davis or full steam ahead with all the candidates.
Mr. Martinez, does Wednesday satisfy you?
And when you say binders of information,
It won't be a lot. It's not a lot.
no, what is in it? Like it just occurred to me, oh, maybe we should get some sort of summary or recap of questions that were asked in the initial interview so that we have some context going forward. But I don't know if that's included or if that's feasible.
We can do that. I mean, I'm envisioning something like your one-page summary that kind of talks about a little bit of the do's and don'ts, so that you can start to digest that in advance of before our orientation, before we get the process started with you all as you all interview finalist candidates. Applications, resumes, supplemental questions for each of the finalists. I don't see a reason why we couldn't also include a section that has the questions that were asked by the interview panel. Comfortable with all of that.
Great.
Thank you. Mr. Holloway?
She said something about speeding tickets, and I don't think that should be a part of it because everybody that speeding don't get tickets. Some get warned. And I would not be on the police department because of a parking ticket that I had paid. One man on the board spoke up and said, "No, we ain't gonna turn this boy around." You know, just a parking ticket. And I paid it. So I don't think, it depends on your stage of life. You're younger, you drive a little more aggressive than you do when you get older. So I don't think it should be a part of it.
So what is
It's
that
not
level?
Really that. Yeah, it does gather that, but parking tickets and speeding tickets are typically not indicative of anything that we're really looking at. What is interesting, and we have had at least one candidate that I know of, is someone who had pages of excessive speeding and doing like 55 in the school zone, right? And then pages of it, right? Everybody's going to get speeding tickets. People are going above the speed. That kind of stuff. That's not that concerning to us. It's when part of that background is helpful when you see a pattern of recklessness. But again, I can only think of one finalist candidate that and he happened to be somebody who was taking out a lot of money and not paying it back. So you saw these trends that kind of happen on a report, and otherwise they're not really getting that kind of scrutiny, nor would they be disqualified for a series of parking tickets or speeding tickets and even one that was excessive. Like, those things happen, right? People make mistakes. But it's when you see a pattern of this, and this guy elected not to go forward.
Thank you. And last question, at least from my space here. When will the other roles here, you said they're due to drop soon?
Yes. So we have dropped off for you all draft job postings for the next 3 positions that we would like to drop tomorrow.
Right.
Like I told you, we'll be straddling one process from the other, so that literally as soon as you all select an executive director and he or she starts, that we are able to come pretty strong and swiftly around her with a lot of supports and say, let's help you interview some folks and let's help you get your next set of executive leaders hired. So before you, something that we distributed are the draft job postings for the assistant director, the senior legal advisor, and investigators. On the investigator posting, you will see some duties that say will do things, and then you will see some that say may do things. We have drafted that on purpose. One of the things we looked at from the drafters of the charter amendment is that there are 3 investigators. We want to leave the flexibility for the executive director, should he or she think it's appropriate, to select maybe a leader of that group. Should that be something that administratively makes sense to the operation of what they are doing or not? So I have a feeling that once those positions are all selected, there'll be a natural leader that will move forward. And if that's a structure that makes sense to the executive director and board, that it left us flexibility to do that. So the duties will say, we'll do all this investigative stuff, may also supervise or revise or look at other things. So we've left some flexibility there, and that'll be pretty consistent for all of our investigator postings.
What about as the executive director bring in one of his old buddies?
Well, that's what an interview panel's for. So here's the beauty of that. So while the executive director is an at-will employee whose hiring and termination is determined by the Community Oversight Board, all of the remaining 8 positions are civil service positions, and the employment terms are for all 8 of those positions are subscribed and outlined in our civil service rules and policies. So the hiring of which means that while they may know one another, the highly qualified person is going to get selected. The executive director is also going to be leaning on interview panels to do that. I mean, I anticipate that the HR staff, who again supports interview panels throughout all of our departments, I expect us to play a heavy role with this executive director. He or she's not going to be sitting in a room just having a one-on-one and making selections. That's not how our civil service process works. So again, we will be ranking and scoring based on minimum and preferred qualifications. We're using a similar approach with the executive director, but you all aren't bound by it, which is why Ms. Ross and I can say, no, we think kind of this, we kind of think that. Independent reviewing and ranking and scoring of these candidates and their hierarchy and who gets invited to an interview is all outlined and prescribed in civil service. So we will have to follow each one of those going forward. But this will not be the executive director alone. This will be on a panel. The panel will offer recommendations and rank those candidates based on that interview panel. And then the executive director will have some discretion within certain limits of the top candidates to choose. And will likely need justification if they don't pick 1, 2, 3. If that makes any sense.
Right.
So it is built not to game the system and to avoid hiring anybody.
Buddy system.
Thank you, Ms. Hall. This is great. Thank you and your team. Thanks to you and your team. We say that every meeting, but it bears repeating. Thank you to Ms. Ross as well for your time and your talents that you poured into this. And futuristically, I'm thanking you too, Mr. Campbell Gooch, as well. And we'll figure out the communication about the board, the executive team. With that, then I'll excuse you, Ms. Hall, and thank you so much. Is there anything else you want to share, though? I should extend
Just
that
want to make sure that everybody is comfortable with us dropping the next 3 job descriptions tomorrow.
Absolutely.
To start gathering candidates. The dates we've prescribed on here are real dates, so you all will have not only the real job descriptions, you will have the dates that they are actually open. So we will plan on dropping all 3 of these jobs tomorrow. And then the closing date for these jobs will be 2 weeks at midnight from tomorrow. Again, I don't anticipate a problem, but if we run into a problem about extending, we'll reach out to Ms. Davis and say, hey, we feel like for this position we could get a few more highly qualified candidates. Civil service rules also provide for some discretion at a request if somebody didn't meet a deadline, they were out of the country or something like that. They can make a request to the HR director for an exception. But I'm bound by, and everybody in the process is bound by those civil service rules. So,
fantastic.
Yeah.
You want to go ahead and move for approval of the job description since we did that for the executive director?
Absolutely. Okay. Anyone like to make a motion?
And maybe for the job postings, because you all have already seen the job descriptions.
Yeah,
These
sorry,
are just
yeah.
the job
The
postings.
job posting. You want to make a motion, please, to approve the job postings before us?
I'll remove the posting of the job descriptions for board assistant director, for legal advisor, and for investigator.
Second? Chief Turner. Discussion? None. All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Abstentions? Motion passes. Thank you very much. Thank you, Ms. Hall. Mr. Campbell Gooch, is this on a related topic or something? Okay. Then with that, I do want to extend the floor to Mr. Floyd, who has to leave very shortly to staff the mayor, and he will give us our overview of the House bill and Senate bill project progress. And I can come right back to you.
Great job. All right.
And I will be extremely brief. And like think that I benefit from the fact that this board is very engaged. I talk to a good number of you pretty frequently about what's going on with House Bill 658 and the companion bill in the Senate 1407. And I just sort of keep a Word document on my computer to help me sort of track things and where they are. And I'll start with the House bill because it is moving at a faster pace than the Senate bill, but the thought there is that the Senate, and I think I mentioned this at our last meeting, is sort of looking at the House to see what happens there before they make a determination. So since the last meeting, House Bill 658 moved through the Calendar and Rules Committee, did that it was before them on March the 7th, at which point it was advanced to the regular calendar of the House. So it'll be on the floor of the House March 14th, which is Thursday, for a vote. And obviously at that point, any member of the House of Representatives can make an amendment or can attempt to amend the bill, so forth and so on. So it'll be on the floor for discussion at that point. At the last meeting, I provided you, I believe, with a copy of the bill with the House amendment, which deferred the enactment date for 1 year. And so the next thing up is, again, the floor vote for the House. It would take 50 votes for the bill to pass. There were 99 members. For those politicos in the room, right now there are 73 members, 73 Republican members of the House, 26 Democrats in the House. The House bill has 47 co-sponsors. So we'll see what happens in the House on Thursday. With regard to the Senate bill, Ms. Hildreth mentioned earlier that a number of you were present on March 5th, wherein the Senate bill was discussed in the Senate Judiciary Committee. A number of, if you weren't able to be present or watch the video, there are a number of people who are allowed to give testimony on that bill. From Nashville, they heard from Pastor Davey Tucker, Miss Jackie Sims, and Jacola Lane all spoke and provided testimony. From Knoxville, you had Eve Thomas and Clarence Bond, who is the executive director of the Police Advisory and Review Committee in Knoxville. With regard to Memphis, there was no one there from CLER, but on that committee, there were two two senators from Memphis.
Senator Robinson
and Sarah Kyle, both of them are from Memphis. And just so happens that the bill did pass through that committee on a 7-2 vote. Senator Robinson and Senator Kyle were the two nay votes. And so right now, the Senate bill is currently in calendar committee. They have not sent it to the floor as of yet. Again, the thought there is that they'll see what happens on Thursday with the House bill and then make a determination on how to proceed. I neglected to mention sort of the biggest thing to come, I think, out of the Senate Judiciary Committee was the amendment. There were two amendments. The first one mirrored the amendment in the House, wherein there's a deferred enactment date that would allow existing boards 1 year before they would have to comply. But the
Marcus, can I just say
only with regard to membership? It doesn't
right.
Thank you.
Well,
yeah.
B and I think B and C.
C and D. C and D. Everything else would take effect upon passage.
Thank you. But in addition to that amendment is the other amendment proposed by Senator Mike Bell, who's the bill's sponsor in the Senate, wherein essentially any community oversight board would maintain subpoena power. That power would not be held by the board, but it be instead held by give specific examples, and again, I provided you with a copy of that amendment. But the executive director and investigators operating within the Community Oversight Board, they will be allowed to petition the Chancery Court in order to subpoena. I'm sorry?
I thought they hit the petition through the police chief, the DA, and one other entity. Am I correct, Phyllis? What was
Investigator,
it?
chief of police, or head of the internal
That's
affairs
what I thought.
division.
Well, but they
could be.
That's on
they
the
could be
amendment.
either any of those
Any of the three,
individuals
right.
could, right, correct, could petition the Chancery Court to subpoena information, documentation, and witnesses.
Am I reading this correctly that the subpoena for testimony, the testimony would be given only before the investigator, chief of police, or head of internal affairs? So
Right.
the board itself would not hear that testimony?
That is correct.
Okay.
And then as I understand it, the investigator would then report back to the board.
Got it. Thank you for that clarification.
And so as it stands, the bill posture in the Senate is different than it is in the House. The hope is that they'll be able to reconcile those differences. If they are unable to reconcile those differences, then a committee would be appointed called a conference committee. The Speaker of the House, obviously Glenn Cassida, and then the Speaker of the Senate, who's also Lieutenant Governor Randy McNally, would then appoint members to the conference committee. As I understand it, that conference committee will be made up of both members of the House and of the Senate, with the task of, I guess, ironing out their differences, but they aren't limited to this amendment. They, at that point, will be able to craft whatever language they wanted and then present that to the House or to the Senate for a vote, if that all makes sense. So as far as the next looming thing with this legislation, Thursday, they start at 9 a.m. on Thursday. The House Bill 658 is number 15 on the agenda. There's no real way to determine what time they will get to it, but they will get to it on Thursday for discussion.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Floyd. Any questions before Mr. Floyd has to depart? If not, thank you very much. We appreciate the update.
My pleasure.
Stay engaged. Thank you. I know you need to depart, so thank you for, please tell the mayor, apologies if we make it late.
And I'm going to have you give these placards to Mr. Dickerson.
Okay.
Before you leave, and I'll be sure to get them.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
All right. Thank you. Next on our agenda, I'd like to, we're moving swiftly. I know we're at the 5:30 p.m. space here. Let me pause and just take a pulse check. Does anyone need 10 minutes kind of refresh break?
Yes.
Yes?
Yes.
Okay. Let's take 10 minutes and let's make it a hard 10 minutes. Like we will be back in here rocking at 5:41. They will kick us out at 6?
So moved.
Move. Anyone second?
Second.
Mr. Sweeney seconds. Any discussion? Mr. Martinez?
In here, give me a.
Keep talking to the mic there. They're going to pick you up.
Sorry, I can't. Where it talks about the creation of the Bylaws Committee.
Mm-hmm.
Somebody can find that.
I'll find that one. Number 9, okay, drafting bylaws is 9.
Okay,
Yes,
the last
yes.
bullet point there,
Mm-hmm.
it says Board Member Lewis will serve on the Bylaws Committee. That should read Board Member Martinez.
Okay.
Yes, please do amend that.
they've already
Right.
done your work for you.
All right. All right, any additional discussion? We can simply amend that.
Yes, and I had a question about that same section based upon the conversation about the whether it was going to be ad hoc to have your rules and procedures committee. So there's not any language in here, and I wasn't at that meeting, but I thought it might be an opportunity if we needed to clarify whether the bylaws committee is ad hoc or pursuant to. It sounded like Mr. Dickerson was recommending to leave it as a standing committee. I didn't know if that needed clarification. It may not.
I don't think we ever established one way or the other what it is. So, I mean, and that's something that doesn't have to be taken up right now, I don't think.
I mean,
Yeah.
we did note, and it's in the minutes, that the committee will function until the bylaws are defined and adopted. I read that to mean that
Okay.
once they are defined and adopted, the committee goes away.
Yeah, it's, I agree with that.
Okay. All right. Thank you for the clarification. Any additional comments, discussion? If not, I believe, so with the amendment, do I take it then?
You have a motion to amend it, so I think we'll just take a second. We'll amend it, and then we'll approve it.
Okay.
So you need to get a second on that motion to amend it.
So I wholeheartedly second that.
Dr. Lewis, second. Any discussion? Okay, all those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Abstentions? The motion passes. Thank you. Next is the minutes for.
Now
yes?
you need to do a motion to approve the amended minutes.
Oh, yes, absolutely. Apologies. So now, could I get a motion to approve the amended minutes?
So, Member Lewis has the pending motion on the floor to adopt the minutes.
Yeah. There's already a motion.
We completed that one.
Yeah, that one's completed.
Oh, to adopt, sorry.
Yes, Member Lewis
So
had
does
a
that have to be
motion on the
seconded?
floor to approve.
I make a motion to adopt the minute with the necessary correction.
Okay.
I second.
So that
Oh,
should
come on,
clean it
Mrs.
up, right? Because Mr. Holloway is making a motion to.
Can you withdraw your original
I
motion?
would be happy to withdraw my motion.
Thank you. All right, now we have this.
Okay, I make a motion to accept the minute with the necessary correction.
Thank you, Mr. Holloway. Ms. Ross, seconds. All those in, any discussion? All those in favor? Please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Abstentions? The motion passes. Thank you. Now on to the minutes for February 26th. Ms. Ross,
You made a correction. Yes.
is this for February 26th?
This is February 16th.
Yeah.
Yeah, let's get the right date on it.
February 12th, that we just.
Yeah.
But
Right,
this
and
one,
this
February
one, there's a
16th.
typo.
Yeah.
Then we can correct the dates.
Okay. Let me get the motion that we can make that an amendment there, right? So
We can go ahead, since they did it earlier, we can go ahead and just make some amendments now, and then we can just do one motion at the end.
Okay, great. Anything else? Anything that catches the eye?
That's what
You see the date? Anything in the substance of the minutes themselves? Right? So with that, then we take it,
Motion to approve the amended minutes.
okay,
We didn't even have a motion, we just had a discussion.
yeah, we just had the discussion. So a motion, can someone please make a motion to accept the amended minutes for February 26th?
I make a motion to accept the amended minutes for February 26th.
Thank you, Ms. Ross.
I
You want a
second that
second?
motion.
Mr. Campbell Brooks, thank you. Any discussion? Okay, all those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Abstentions? The motion passes. Thank you very much. And then the last but not least, and then we'll go straight to our last substantive thing on our agenda here is the NACO regional meeting. I'm going to expedite this a bit. I shared with you before in my chair remarks here the background of the conversation. The request is this. The regional meeting is coming to Nashville. The budget they've put together, they expect it to cost $8,000 in total, and that's for airfare, hotel, feeding of the guests and participants, and panelists as well, and I'm sure other things as well. I don't have the budget in front of me. The mayor's office has allocated $3,000 to the for the cost of the event. They reached out by email and requested an additional $3,000 from our board. So that would be essentially that we would be covering almost 75% of the total budget of this meeting. I want to share with the board openly my feelings here as your chair and this person has been on these meetings. I have some apprehension here about us covering such a large portion of the budget. Not that we don't want to be gracious hosts, but I think we are being gracious hosts already. Two, we have not been part of the substantive makeup of the agenda. There was also a request also that we help them secure that if we can't secure the additional $3,000, that we help them identify sponsors that could assist in that way. I don't think that's a proper use of the board space and time right now. And I'm speaking very candidly to you here as chair. Ultimately, I will follow the board's decisions here. There is an opportunity, perhaps, and again, keep in mind we do not have a budget yet either, so I don't believe in spending monopoly money here. I do think that, I have my meeting on the 19th coming up. I can take this into that meeting and have questions about, what is actually feasible right now, and perhaps the board thinks it's okay, maybe we extend $1,000 in kind, right, in the space here, but I'm open to it. I just want to have the conversation here, and then I'd like to have some understanding. Mr. Holloway.
I think we need to talk with the council, let them vote on, let them decide that this is the money that we need to be able to attend the conference. It's training for us, and we'll spend a lot of our time, to come to the meeting, trying to put this together. The people voted on, we're a voice for the people, and let them vote on what's paying for that, period.
Let them vote on who's paying for.
Let the council vote on, see if they can come up with some money for us to pay for this.
So I take your point, Ms. Holloway. I should share part of the reason, the funding. So the mayor's office, as I understand, they were trying to figure out if they should set up a symposium or something for the training of us as board members. They are using either part or all of those funds to extend to this because we're using this as a training. We discussed that in our meeting. So I think it's important to keep that in mind as well, which is another reason why I feel like we as a board, we are contributing, even if indirectly, because the funds that were set aside for that purpose have now been extended to them. In addition to them having to pay $0 for the use of the space, which is usually, as you know, the largest check you've got to write outside of catering is to secure a facility. But I certainly take your point. Dr. Lewis, I saw you turn around, but I see Mr. Campbell-Gooch here as well.
I gave up.
Okay. Mr. Campbell-Gooch.
Relinquish.
I just wanted to really quickly state that I to also agree that we shouldn't be spending monopoly money that we don't have. And then on the opposite end, just like you were saying, is that we haven't been involved in the agenda. Not only has the COB or the board have been involved, and since we can't participate on the panels, there's really not a lot of Nashville presence just in general. And so I just wanted to put that out there because when I was on the call, there was definitely conversation around like Nashville people who are doing work, maybe not on oversight, but things that relate to oversight should be included in the panel discussions and also just the event overall.
Thank you. Anything else you want to share from that out of that meeting, though, since you were on the call?
A lot of the things that you've already touched on, those budgeting things, but also since there was a conversation around, since we cannot be involved on the panel discussions without triggering open meetings, that there should be a call out to the people who are doing like restorative work or like on the ground, as far as sitting on board on panels and then offering insight into the work that's happening in Nashville.
Thank you. Mr. Sweeney?
Do I understand correctly that they were going to be holding this regional meeting anyway?
Yes.
And then they just decided to switch and hold it here?
Well, they were going to host it. They said they were going to host it in Nashville, regardless. Yes, that they were committed to having a hearing, yes. And we did discuss that last week. Yeah, absolutely, our last meeting. Mr. Martinez?
So regardless of whether we decide to find out they're coming here,
yes,
which is something that we're going to be able to attend.
Yes.
Okay.
Yep. It saved the city a lot of money by us attending the conference here. We don't have to travel out of town. We don't have to go hotels not to spend money on food at the restaurant. So this is probably the best mechanism for us and the city to attend the conference here.
And we still will. This does not change us attending at all. This is just a special request that has been made by the leadership of NACO that we would entertain their request for a $3,000 sponsorship. And that's why I'm bringing it before the board. I didn't hit reply or anything. I just read it, and I literally think I got it in the parking lot. So I'm bringing it before the board. If it's the board's position here that, we're not in a position to, offer $3,000 sponsorship, I will communicate that. But I need to know that that's how we as a board, we feel.
I would think that would make good headlines for the Tennessean to let them know, let the people know that the city is not bagging us on this. We need to make a statement. It needs to be headline on the front page.
What do you mean by that, Mr. Holloway? So I can understand.
That they're not going to fund us to go to a training conference right here in town. And that's a shame. The people voted for us to represent them, but still, they are not going to provide us the money that we need to attend to a conference right here in town.
Oh, but they have, Mr. Holloway. So we have that right. So let me back up. We have the mayor's office has extended $3,000. That $3,000, they are asking for. NACO is asking for an additional $3,000. They want us to cover $6,000 of the $8,000 that they need. The $3,000 is good. That's been promised. And so for and the mayor's office is extending this. One, because we certainly welcome them to Nashville, the cause and the purpose of it, but also because we, as the city's Community Oversight Board, will be in attendance. And so there's strong support from the mayor's office. And I can say that just by being on the calls and communicating with Marcus to say, have you all extended this? So I think on the support side, it's been very strong. Mr. Campbell-Gooch.
Brother Emmett had his turn.
Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't see it.
Well, I think that since we are not going to be able to participate in the panel discussion, that the $3,000 that's been committed by the mayor's office will be sufficient for our involvement in the conference.
Thank you. And at any time, I'll take a motion on any of this. Dr. Lewis.
And so this $3,000 would be coming from our oversight board.
As I understand it, it's not coming from the oversight board. It is coming from funds that the mayor's office set aside for our training and setup. I think they were calling it a symposium.
So I would be concerned about us doubling their money with the appearance of a potential conflict of interest, since we have absolutely no idea what they're going to say and who's going to be saying it. So I would be opposed to giving them more funding.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Campbell-Gooch.
I motion that we do not give them additional funding.
Okay.
Second.
Okay. Thank you. Any discussion? Additional discussion?
I just,
Mr. Martinez?
we don't have any idea what is going to be discussed at all.
We
No
not
program.
beyond the agenda. Remember the agenda I shared last meeting that didn't share panelists, but it gave you an overview of the topics.
Okay.
So we do know topics, and we also agreed that none of us would participate. But that's as much as they're able to share here. We know it will be. I'm sure it will be strong and good content. But have we been able to, as a board, contribute? No. The good thing I should share, there are community organizations that have been very, very strongly involved, like stringently. They've been involved in this in part of the causes they've had as well. So yeah. Any additional discussion? Okay. With that, all those in favor of the motion to not extend any sponsorship on behalf of the Community Oversight Board, please say aye. Anyone opposed? Abstentions? Anyone opposed? No? Okay. Abstentions? The motion passes. Thank you. Okay. And I just want to confirm, Alex, do you have anything on this? I include this. No? So we won't have it on the board's appeals. Next, we'll come to the update for our Bylaws Committee. Mr. Sweeney, Matt, and as well as Mr. Dickerson have come together. And of course, Mr. Martinez, I'm not leaving you out of this. You are our lifeblood the last meeting, so thank you. But I'd like to give the floor to the two of them because they're going to walk us through this process in as seamless of a way as possible.
which way you want to start, Alex?
Do you want to just give it back to me and I'll?
Yeah, I'll give it back to you because there were a couple issues that he raised in the marked up bylaws that we have gone through, and I've agreed with almost all of the proposed changes.
Okay, I want to try to make this as efficient as possible to get us in and out of here while still fully discussing what everybody wants to discuss. So
Yes,
if you
sir.
guys can pull out the version of what you've been given, the bylaws. This is with my red line edits on it. That's the most recent thing that we have. What I would like to do, because some of these articles we may have issues about. If anyone has an issue, even a question about it, we can set it aside. But for the ones we actually agree on, and I'll point out what Matt and I have had discussions about, maybe we could put those into one category that we don't have to go back and consider them, and then we'll put others where even if you have a question, we'll put that into another category. And then once we have our list of 5 or 6 items that we still need to talk about, then we could maybe turn that to the chair to lead discussion about what those items would be. Is everyone comfortable with that format? Mostly we whittle away the stuff we don't need to really talk too much about. So first of all, I'll point out that Matt and I talked about changing the numbering system from Roman numerals to Article 1, Article 2. We agree with that. It's consistent with kind of how they do Tennessee state law, for instance. You can still have Article 1, Section 2, and Article 2, Section 3, so to speak. So anybody have any issue with that renumbering? All right, we'll put that as a go. Anyone have any issue with the preamble or want to discuss that? No? Article 1 itself, any issues with that discussion? Okay. Article 2, anyone want to make any discussion about that? Keep going. Okay, so Article 3, we're going to have, I'm going to ask that, first of all, for Section A, Matt and I have come to an agreement that we think that particular provision should be struck. Does anyone want to discuss that? Okay.
Can I, hold on one moment.
Sure.
We're talking,
Article 3, Section A.
okay.
That's struck through. And I'll go ahead and say the reason for this is it was in the original ordinance that was before Metro Council and did not pass. What was put into the charter amendment was not this language.
It was not that specific.
Gotcha.
Yeah, it wasn't that, and it doesn't mean it's necessarily excluded, but anything that you put into your bylaws which suggests that you might be expanding the power would be something I have to recommend against.
Okay.
So we're good on A.
Question.
Yes.
That doesn't necessarily preclude us from doing the things that are in there.
I think it doesn't necessarily preclude it, no. This is only saying what your powers are. And remember, these can always be amended to include that, to include other things later on down the road. And we'll talk a little bit about the amendment part as we get a little further along. But it does not preclude you from having that power, putting that power in. It's just a matter of you don't want to expand on what your charter amendment powers are.
We can't create a power that we don't have by the bylaws. We can just reflect the powers that we have.
Yeah. This doesn't, just because we're voting on your powers and duties now, doesn't mean that you can't interpret your powers and duties to be more or less in the future. If that makes sense. Okay. All right, so good on B. Anyone have any issues with C through I?
I have,
Okay.
I'm sorry.
Can you tell me which one it is?
Yeah. So I just need more understanding about G, conduct public hearings.
Okay.
And if you can just kind of explain what that entails.
Matt?
Yeah, this could be a couple different types of public hearings. It could be where we invite the community and just have a broad public hearing.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's also likely, because it's something that's comes from other boards and all like that, that if there's an investigation and if there's a recommendation that's made by the executive director based upon the investigation, that could then come up to the board for a fuller hearing if the board wants to hear more information about it. So you could have at least those 2 different types of public hearings.
Does that satisfy your understanding?
We can always put this to the side and discuss it later. If you
Okay,
like.
we can.
We'll put that as
I'm just concerned about that language there about public hearings and what that may be later interpreted as, and maybe getting some resistance if that language is in the bylaws.
Okay.
There's a provision in here later on too that we get to interpret what our own provisions mean. and we can construe them as narrowly or as broadly as we want to later on. Right, all of these powers were basically taken from the ordinance or whatever that we already have.
Yeah, and it's not so much about our interpretation, it's about others and how they may interpret that and use that later on.
Right.
That's a good point.
Could it also mean town hall meetings as opposed to
Absolutely.
public hearings?
Absolutely.
So we'll come back to that. We'll
Yeah.
note that. Dr. Lewis?
I
and
have
Mr.
a
Cooper?
question about subheading E. It refers, and this is some language in previously as well, it refers to an officer and civil service rules and regulations. Does that mean we do not have authority over someone who is not a civil servant?
It just means you have to do it within the parameters of the civil service rules.
Okay, so we were talking earlier about our job postings, and most everybody is a civil servant, with the exception of the one at-will employee.
Sure.
So does this language in E apply to every employee of Metro PD?
Yeah, because any disciplinary that would take place for anyone who is...
I'm
Correct.
not a lawyer. Thank you.
Smart lady.
No, I'm a doctor, I'm a dummy.
Mr. Cooper?
Sure. On C, I wonder if there are a couple of words missing there. There's issue policy advisory and resolution reports assessing allegations of misconduct by NPD, comma, and make recommendations to agencies.
I'm fine with that.
Or is that just that we're not allowed to use an Oxford comma?
I mean, I agree.
But it's, yeah.
No, I mean, I think we're issuing policy advisory and reports, and we're also issuing recommendations.
Right.
Right?
But the comma makes things very confusing.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think we either take out the comma or add.
Make recommendations, issue, or issue recommendations.
The wordsmith.
Issue.
I couldn't scan that.
Anyway, I'm not going to fight over comma.
I would just make that suggestion.
Yeah, we'll go ahead and mark that as something.
I found it confusing.
Anybody have, so we're going to hold off, we're going to talk about C and G. Any
Yep.
other between C through I that people want to talk more about? Okay, on J, we're going to have to go back to that one, and that's one that I'm going to ask Ms. Hall to talk about once we get to that point. This is just about the board's chosen authority over the number 2 and 3 positions instead of just the executive director. Anyone have any issues with K, L, M, or N that they want to talk about?
K has the words responsibility for twice.
Okay.
Yeah, it looks like it was caught there.
Okay, we'll mark that, come back to it.
Yep.
Just strike it. I mean, we can agree to strike that. It's just a...
Which one are we striking?
Responsibility for
It says responsibility for.
Delegates to the executive director.
We'll strike one of those. Okay, good. Any others, L through M? Okay.
I got one.
Sure.
M. And this is talking about the board's responsibility, or the executive director responsibility, correct?
No.
Come on, Fred.
No,
This is
talking
board
about the board.
This is the
That's
board.
the
It's the board.
Okay. Then
Yeah, Article 3, board shall. Still Article 3.
I do have a question, sorry, about M. It says develop rules for determining staggered terms. Forget it, I take it back.
Yeah.
Sorry.
That's straight out of the.
I appreciate
Charter.
Yeah, I appreciate that one.
Good otherwise?
And later on in the bylaws, we actually do that.
That was going to be my point. Why are we developing rules if we do it later in the bylaws?
Right. Because that's where the authority derives from, and then we did it.
Got it.
This is like a summary.
Okay, moving on to Article 4 then, Section 1. Anyone have want to discuss that later? Section 2.
How would that be affected by this pending legislation?
Yeah.
I think that, this is taken, as my understanding, Matt, straight from the amendments.
This is from the charter.
Right.
Yeah.
Provision.
So we would want to leave that in, right?
Yeah.
Okay,
For
all
now.
right, that was just my question.
Yeah, for now.
Change it if the bill passes.
Yep,
Yeah.
or
Cross
fight
the
it.
bridge when we get
Or
there.
fight it. Right.
Because right now it's the law.
In section 2, I don't know if there will be any changes, but Matt, it might make sense for you to explain.
Right. So section 2 is then making the rules for how we would allocate terms of service among the first board. And so it was weighted toward the community members to give them the longest representation and the deepest representation, and yet to make sure that all three groups had at least one person who would be 3 years on the board. And so then it was just a balancing of the left remaining positions.
Any questions about that? Okay, good. Section 3. Okay. Section 4, any issues? Section 5, we're going to have to fill in that blank, so I'm going to put that to come back to it. Section 6, this section's been rewritten, so I'm going to ask Matt if he can tell us what it says now.
Right. The last two lines, where it begins in the middle of the second to the last line, the chair. We had edited this provision before to broaden it out from just failure to be able to attend meetings, and we had put in the other matters regarding conflicts of interest and such, and ethical standards. And yet that last sentence remained that it was dealing only with attending meetings. Okay, so the change, and then Alex and I have a difference between may and shall that we can talk about in a minute. But the reworded last two lines, beginning with the chair, would read instead, the chair shall inquire of the member about the issue and whether that member will be able to positively address it and wishes to continue to serve on the board or to resign. Let me read it again. The chair shall or may inquire of the member about the issue and whether the member will be able to positively address it and wishes to continue to serve on the board or to resign. So this whole provision is to address active participation and training issues and ethical issues. And if some issue ever comes up, to have it the responsibility of the board chair to come talk to whichever of us it is to see what's going on and to see if it can be resolved. Or if the person can't resolve it for whatever reason, whether they want to continue to serve. This is not a removal provision in the sense that it can't force anybody off. It's just a matter of kind of intervention and discussion to make sure that you have active board members who don't have any issues regarding their service. The issue as to may and shall is it was originally drafted as a shall in order, again, to make sure that we look for issues and we spot issues and we address them if they come up. Alex says that he was concerned that putting shall in there and imposing an affirmative duty could result in any type of suit or whatever, by saying that somebody had a duty and they didn't exercise that responsibility. I don't see that because all it is shall discuss. It doesn't result in any action. So I don't see that it does, and I think that affirmative is better than, maybe letting it slide for some people and addressing it to others. So that was the idea for putting in shall.
I think we should table this one.
Yeah. Okay.
Ms. Hilder?
No, if it's been tabled, I will
Yeah, I'll mark it as.
speak to it then.
Okay.
And can we, for the next draft that we look at, can we have what you just said typed out too?
Absolutely. Yeah, we just redid this
Yeah.
here 5 minutes before we started. Yes, absolutely.
And we will speak on these reserved issues tonight?
Tonight, yeah.
Thank you.
Hopefully we'll have a final, this will be completed by the end of the night, ideally.
Yep. Get that done.
So next one, I'm going to add in, it's a space. This is Article 5 now. I'm just going to put 404 James Robertson Parkway. We don't know what floor we're on, everybody's on yet, but that seems to be the place you're going to be. So we might as well just add that to it. So any issue with that?
Alex, we skipped over 5, or I don't think you asked about it.
He asked about 5.
Yeah, I've reserved that because we got to put
Okay,
these,
got it.
we got to
Okay.
fill in that blank.
Okay.
Okay, Article 6. Okay, any issue with Section 1? Any issue with Section 2? Any issue with, okay, on Section 3, we agree on that revision. So Matt and I don't have any issue with that part, with those revisions. Okay, no issue there. Section 4, just so you can see, there is a closed parentheses edit. It's kind of small in there, but
Right.
we agreed with that.
Right, well, this should be a matter of discussion too, because when we made our first decision on officers, we did it for 6 months. The question is, do we want to make that a continuous practice, or was that just to decide until we get to know each other for short terms, and then we want to have a longer term after that? So, I mean, it's probably better to have 1-year terms for officers at some point. So I would say this is probably a matter for discussion.
Okay, I'll mark that.
You got
Coming back to it.
I just want to say quickly, framers' intent, it was as Mr. Sweeney indicated, that was the very first meeting we had to get started, and to give people comfort with making a decision that would be revocable or revisitable, 6 months, but I am in favor of 1-year terms going forward.
Ms. March, anything?
It was all said.
Okay, thank you.
And in the meantime, like if while we're going through these, if there's someone who wants to draft language on certain things that they see, it might be helpful that way when we come back around to it, we'll be like, here's what the edits are. Article 7, Section 1, any issues with that? Section 2, we agreed to have the strike through. There's a new one. It's a strike through of the second sentence that says each board member shall serve on at least one standing committee. We're striking that now, proposing striking that now just because we don't have enough standing committees to board everyone. Of course, everyone's always encouraged to be on as many committees as you think could be effective. So that's the one addition. Any discussion there? Okay. Section 3, including A through G, any issues with that? Section 4, there's one new amendment on the 4th line of Section 4. It says, after the comma, it says, along with other relevant, it'll be candidate criteria. So you'll insert the word candidate there. And I'm going to come back to this because it's got a blank we got to fill in. Section 5, any issues?
So my question is, are we using ad hoc and task forces interchangeably, or are they two separate types of committees? That's my question.
The way this is drafted, there are 2 different types, because task forces can have non-board members.
Okay. I did read that somewhere.
My statement real quick is that I've noticed when I've done research on bylaws for civilian oversight boards that they had definitions at the beginning, making for those terms, like ad hoc committee, standing committee. So when someone's reading them and engaging with them, they just know what the difference is once they read them.
Okay.
That way we can have a discussion on the definition and all that nuance is out in the language.
Yeah.
I'll put that.
Or would that be something that would be addressed in rules?
No, I mean, you could have a definitional section here.
Yeah.
We hadn't discussed that, we hadn't thought of that, but we could have a definitional section.
And I'll put as of right now, assuming we were to pass the meat of this tonight, it's only going to take a majority vote to add the definitions.
Right.
So.
Yeah, one thing to notice, and we'll get there in a minute, is usually for bylaws for amendments, it requires 2/3 or something like that.
Yeah.
And this was intentionally designed to make it easy to amend as we're still trying to figure out who we are and what we're doing, kind of like the 6-month officer thing, so that we can come back in and we can make changes and then we can lock in at 2/3 later if we want to do that.
Any other reason to come back to Section 5? Are we I've added the definitions part as something to discuss later. So, all right, good on section 5. Section 6. Section 7. Okay. I'll point out the edit that we have there that I made. Matt and I agreed to. So, go to section 7. Section 8. Section 9. Okay, the section, Article 8 is going to be one that kind of goes back to the first part. We're going to have Ms. Hall talk a little bit about it.
Yeah, you didn't.
Sorry, I meant section 9 of
We have
Article
2 section 7s under Article.
Oh, that's what.
Under Article 7.
Yeah, so the second section
Yes.
7 is now section 8. Okay. Section 8 is now section 9. That's a good, point.
This is supposed to be 8. This is supposed to be 9.
Okay.
This is 7.
Okay.
Sorry, that was a new one. Okay. So we'll have to come back to Article 8. Article 9, any issues?
So,
Any issues with Article 9? Okay. Article 10. No issues.
Yeah, quick question. I'm assuming the arrangement for the translator or interpreter would come out of the COB budget, correct?
And I looked into other alternatives for that to see if there was something. I was unable to find any that state trial courts does it, but that's a different fund that's covered by the states, I believe. So we looked for alternative sources. It looks like it's going to have to come out of your funding.
In Article 9, the last line says the chair, or the executive director person. Sounds like a person like from Arvin the Martian, and we don't refer to them as the executive director person anywhere else. I don't think.
I think you're right.
Shouldn't be.
Yeah, we'll just strike
that
that.
out.
Yes.
Yeah, we'll go with that.
Thank you.
Anything more on Article 10? Okay.
I had a real quick question on section 9. I'm sorry to rewind, but the part that it says the written reports. Can somebody talk about that? It's just the last sentence in section 9. The operation of committees and task force shall be documented fully in written reports that are made available to all board members. Can somebody just kind of speak on that?
I'm sorry, where is
It's right here. I'm sorry.
At the top of page 8.
Section 9, Article 7.
Oh, section.
Section 9.
Sorry.
So Article 7, section.
No, it's fine.
Oh, I thought you were talking. You said Article 9.
Article
correct?
7, section 9.
You're asking about
I
the
think it's-
reports of the committees and task forces?
Yes,
think
yes. I was just asking for some clarity, some
minutes. I
conversation.
think minutes are required for that.
Okay.
So
Is that because it's 3 or more on each standing committee?
It's just so that everybody knows what happened at particular meetings,
Okay.
so that we can go back and look and everybody can see
Okay.
what was actually done.
Okay. Okay.
Okay, I think we're down to Article 11. Sorry.
I'm sorry, I have a question about the signs, the sign provision. Is that something that we can kind of go back? Because I want to know, like, legal ramifications around that if we wanted to make some more guidelines about what those signs and how they should maybe adhere or what they should not have on those signs that would violate maybe laws regarding we don't want to violate any free speech laws,
Sure.
but we also don't want to have signs that may have some things on it that may push free speech.
I'll just go ahead and tell you that content-based restrictions are very difficult. They have to have strict scrutiny on them. So it's not to say that you can't change this. So the short answer to your question is yes, and these can be changed, but anything that's content-based will be very difficult to uphold as constitutional.
Yeah, I just want to know if we can have a little bit, if we should have a little bit more conversation about that at a later time.
Okay. With that taken in mind, are you okay with what we have drafted for now?
Yes.
Okay.
Dr. Lewis?
I know that the General Assembly has a no sticks rule.
Mm-hmm.
Are we interested in a no stick rule for your sign? I'm just bringing it up. I don't care one way or the other if people have a sign on a stick.
Did you pull this from Metro Human Relations?
I do think that came from the Human Relations rules.
Yeah.
Commission rules.
So.
Or bylaws. I do, but I don't have it here in front of me, so I'm not
Just
positive.
FYI, it's maybe standard.
Just standard Metro language. That's fine. I just wanted to bring that up as just.
And I think it makes sense. We could always consider adding
Yeah,
it in the future.
we can, and some of these things too can be fleshed out further, I think, in the rules for the operation of the board. That you know can further address some more detail if we want to. Either way.
I have one more thing. Article 10, waived. That's not how you spell waived. Second to last.
Thank you.
I would like to waive my sign.
Where are we?
Next to last line. Not should be held or waived.
Yep.
It's just there should be no I.
Well, what happened was that's a legal reference. And that's how I think spell check caught it and changed it to the legal spell.
Sorry, Mrs. Sweeney.
Nice try.
Yep. Okay.
Right. Article 11. This one, as you can see, the proposed edit. Obviously, if the statute gets enacted, this could affect this. So for now, I'm recommending taking this sentence out, but the idea is that eventually it could be added back in if there's some way to statutorily protect through a confidentiality agreement, then that's something you would probably want in your powers.
The provision here had nothing to do with the statute. The provision in here was taken from another state where they had a mechanism by which they could protect confidential information from one agency to another without running afoul of public records.
And one other edit I put in here that I may or may not have talked with you about, Matt. We refer to the COB as board in some instances and COB.
Yep.
So I'd say
It
all
should be
references.
board throughout. The intention was to make it board throughout.
Okay.
There were just some that missed. It was written both ways, and then it went back and was edited, and some were missed and some were not.
And I'll say the same issue is in Article 10. There's a COB that we need to move. So we'll just we'll agree that all the COB references are board.
Yep.
Okay. Any other issue with Article 11?
No.
Okay. Article 12, we still have a blank there that we need to fill in, so we'll mark that to come back to. Article 13, there's one additional edit under C, under quorum. Your quorum isn't going to change regardless. One of the concerns we had, the reason this is kind of written oddly, is because it's from another board or commission. This is a charter-created board, and so your charter says that you have 11 members. So even if there's let's say someone resigns, but the Metro Council doesn't reappoint someone, and you have 10 temporarily, it doesn't change your quorum. You still have to have 6 as a quorum, and it's always going to be 6. So I propose changing after the word "shall" in the second line, strike the rest of it, and then just put 6 members.
Right. Now, one thing that may be for discussion is if you use the formula, you would end up with 8.
Okay. I was
Okay?
wondering about that.
You would end up with 8 out of the 11. Just because of how we are constituted from multiple constituencies, maybe 6 is too small a number. Maybe it should be 7, or maybe it should be 8. Now, obviously, the higher you make the number, the more difficult you make it, because at some point we won't all be able to attend all the meetings.
Well, and I want to point out too, the Metro Code establishes that quorum is a majority of members. So this is consistent with that part.
Are you saying that we couldn't make it higher under the circumstances?
I don't know if you could. I'd have to look into that. Because it establishes, it doesn't say, I don't know if that's a minimum or a maximum, right? Like how a quorum statute is written.
I would think it's a minimum, but
But we can't have a bylaw that's more restrictive than Metro Charter.
Yeah, that's what I would.
Yeah.
I don't think you could. I think it has to be 6. But again, if it comes back and the bylaws committee looks at it, and your new legal resource advisor tells you that they have a different interpretation, then you could always amend that with majority vote.
I believe 6 would kind of give us some flexibility in case somebody had to take off.
All right, we can come back and discuss that. Does anyone discuss it, Matt, or are you okay with it?
No, I'm fine.
I'm fine with it.
All right. So anything else on section 1? Any questions on section 1?
Yeah, on section 1D, the first sentence says all meetings of the board are open to the public, and then the third sentence says all called meetings are subject to the requirements of adequate public notice. Is there a difference between meetings in the first sentence and called meetings in the third sentence, or can we just say meetings in both cases?
I think there's an emergency notice. There's an emergency notice exception to the Open Meetings Act, which
Okay.
allows you a little more flexibility in that. So I think that's what the difference.
Although you still have to give notice in those.
You still have to give notice, but it has.
And and the adequacy of that is defined by the statute, right?
Yes.
So either way, you're giving adequate notice given the circumstances.
I agree.
Okay.
It's like that ORC that does give additional regulations for review of call meeting too, in addition to that emergency provision that you're talking about.
Okay. Can you speak to that? I'm not sure I know what that is.
I think it was an Office of Open Records opinion, or it might have been an Attorney General opinion that discussed that there's additional notice that needs to be provided when you're doing a called meeting versus a standing meeting. So basically, an agenda has to be posted, must be posted for a called meeting, whereas for a standing meeting, you don't actually have to.
Okay, although even standing meetings are subject to the requirements of adequate public notice, aren't they? Whatever those requirements are. We're not talking about agendas here.
Yeah, the Metro Code section is the one that requires that there has to be something posted on the calendar of events by Friday. So
Okay, but this is under the Tennessee Open Meetings Act. This sentence refers to that, not the Metro Charter. That might be worth.
Okay. Let me. How about can we mark that to come back to it, and I'll look at it in the meantime.
Yeah.
Okay. Section 2. We're on Article 13, Section 2. Okay, so we changed a little bit of. This is a new amendment to subsection C. Instead of using the kind of antiquated yays and nays, we're put taken by yes, no, and abstention. And then in section D, what we did with this part is we're clarifying that the chair. I'll tell you what the amendment is. I'll tell you why we did it. So we're clarifying that the chair has a voting right, not just in the cases of ties. Different commissions and boards do this differently. But because of the way that the charter amendment was set up, where it's proportional to certain membership groups, we thought that the board just shouldn't be taken out of the voting process when obviously the people of Nashville had a certain idea of what percentage they wanted for voting. So the language we're going to add is going to be after. Okay, so it reads currently every time a vote is taken, each member of the board is entitled to one vote. I put comma including the chair. Period. So that ends that sentence. Then there's a new sentence, and this clarifies what it takes to pass. It says, a motion or resolution passes upon the affirmative vote of a majority of members present and voting. So what that means is once you get a quorum, everyone who's voting on a motion, as long as the majority of the people there and who aren't abstaining vote yes, it passes. So if you get, let's say 6 of you attend a meeting, we have quorum, 2 of you say, I'm going to abstain from this, you're still going to need to get 3/4 of those remaining votes in order to pass a motion. Okay? Or if it's 3 people abstain, you got to get 2 out of 3. So you can still pass it as long as you have quorum. If that makes sense. Does that make sense to everyone? Okay, it allows you to keep conducting business without worrying about, hey, we didn't have a full membership body here, but we could conduct business with quorum. Now that I've explained it, does anyone want to go back and talk about that more, or do we feel like we have a good grasp of that part? Okay. Good. All right, section 3.
Can I go back to
Sure.
2A2?
Mhm.
All agendas shall provide for time which shall be determined at each meeting when the general public may address the board. I read that to say that there will be time for public comment at every board meeting, if I'm reading that correctly, in contrast to Article 10, where time shall be made available for open public comment on a regular periodic basis on a schedule set by the board, which leaves it more open to discretion. And which does the drafters intend, or am I reading?
No, you're right. The intention was to make it discretionary.
Okay.
And so this should say, all agendas where the public may address, it shall note it in the agenda, something like that.
Yeah, that would make sense.
Do you want to repeat that?
No, but I'll come up with language. Because that was not very artful language.
Unlike the rest of this, which is
right, which is all very artful.
Very, very
Yes,
artful.
yes.
Okay. Any issue with section 3?
I got a note. I wrote myself a note here and I forgot to raise it. Under Article 10, when we talked about the extended time, I just wanted to know if we could maybe also include that may shorten the time as well, or no. Could we include that may extend or shorten? I'm sorry. I'm going back to Article 10 under the community public comment, and I do apologize. I did mean I had a note here to raise it, and I missed my own note. And so I want to know the sentence dealing with the time period. And it said that the chair of the board, upon motion approved by a majority of its members, may extend the time period or broaden the subject. And I wanted to know if we can say shorten as well. May extend or shorten.
Well, I think it's referring to beforehand, the language says time limit, so that's the minimum.
Can we perhaps put
I
a
wanted to
number
have that
there?
option.
Can we agree on the time?
Is 2 minutes fine? Can we, is that? would
Well,
that-
I like that if we may extend it, but I also want the option of may need to shorten it just in case we have time limitations or we have some other. So does that make
if
sense?
we have more people. a lot of
Yeah,
people
yes, I
involved.
wanted to have that option,
we
not
say
just be
modify?
locked
Yeah.
in. Or modify, yeah, anything, just not to be locked in to just extending the time and not being able to shorten it.
Okay, I just,
Dr.
in the entrance of transparency, I don't want to be seen as saying, oh, we're going to let you guys speak for 5 minutes, and then, oh, we changed our minds. Sorry, bye.
We're trying to go home right
Yeah,
Right.
I don't.
But if we have 50 people show up who want to speak rather than 10,
But we have there's a limit.
Yeah.
We just don't want to shorten the limit. Is what
right?
I'm
But
saying.
I mean, if we have 50 people and they each have 5 minutes.
That's not what this says, though. You can just say, we've got 10 minutes for public comment.
Yeah, beforehand.
Okay.
Ms. Ross.
I think we should put the time in there for public comments.
It sounds like maybe we should come back to that. If everyone is okay with that.
Yeah, we can go make this
When we come back to it, I'd like to hear more about whether that's a time limit per person or a time limit block in the meeting or both. I'd like to.
The intention was to be able to set both. You know, we'll have a half an hour and each person can speak for 3 minutes or something. That was the concept.
Thank you.
Mr. Holloway.
I had that experience about a week ago. I went to a zone here, and one of the largest group had 52 members. Gave them 5 minutes apiece. And so our rule was at the end of the agenda. So we never had the opportunity, so they had to continue ours to the 14th. So I think it should be a way you can modify the time instead of just putting a Pacific time down there. Depends on the group that you have.
Okay.
I mean, are we gonna come back?
We'll come back to it.
Yeah,
Marked
for
it.
sure.
Come back to it.
Glad you brought that up.
So back to Article 13, Section 3. Any issues with that? Section 4. We're on page 10.
Thank you.
Sorry.
No, that's fine.
Section 4. Section 5. Okay, Article 14.
Could I go back? There's a typo on section 2C. You've got a paren 1, but there's no paren 2. Paren 1, Robert's Rules of Order. Deliberations of the board period.
There's no parents to.
Any reason to, Matt, are you okay with striking that one?
Well, I'm sorry, Bob, which line were you in?
Section 2C, deliberation of the board.
Right.
It says paren 1, close paren, Robert's Rules of Order.
Oh, and there's no, sure, absolutely.
Okay, that's true. Okay. Okay, back to Article 14. Good. Article 15. Good. Article 16. And let me just go ahead and address this real quick because I think I agree with Matt's position that because the bylaws are being adjusted and will continue to be adjusted early because you don't even have an executive director yet, I think it makes sense to leave it at a majority with his proposal and ignore my 2/3 proposal. But Matt and I have agreed that at some point, once you get a little more concrete there, you should really move it to 2/3 because it makes them more set in stone. And it makes it harder for people to manipulate voting to get what they want when the bylaws would normally prohibit that.
Yeah.
Right.
So we'll just say that it's majority. Does anyone want to, is everybody comfortable with that? Okay, we'll skip that then.
So that means everywhere where it currently reads 2/3.
It would. There's 2/3 in other places, and I think we're leaving that there for now. It's just in this one spot. It'll say majority instead of 2/3, and eventually down the road you'll vote to make it 2/3.
Under Article, can't do the Roman numerals here. 16 board dash members. Can we take out the dash at the next to last line?
Yep.
Thanks.
Yep.
Actually, I think that dash is a space edit.
It's a red line.
Yeah, it's a red line edit to bring that in.
Well, I guess my color discrimination isn't what it should be.
Ms. Marsh?
Under Article 14, can we just get the code of ethics attached to this?
I think it's a good idea. Are you comfortable with that, Matt?
Yes, it was attached to the draft,
Okay.
Yep.
but yes.
And we'll just, and that way it's so it doesn't change. If they change the website, we don't change our ethics. I'll put what I'll suggest is putting a sentence in here saying a copy of this code is attached as Exhibit A.
Yep.
All right, good. Article 17. Article 18, one new adjustment. The third line from the bottom says, the board shall by resolution duly adopt, it should be duly adopt, on the affirmative vote majority of the board members present. I think we had talked about, when it comes to, this is interpreting issues, we talked about changing that from the board to the chair, since the chair also would break a tie if there was ever a tie. So we thought about changing that from board to chair, but it sounds like we're going to have to manipulate that whole paragraph.
What are we adopting in that sentence?
I think
We adopting such interpretation or construction?
The interpretation or construction.
Then we need to delete set forth.
Yeah. It might be that we need to tackle this one separately and reword it. I'll look at that while we're going back on the other things. We'll circle that. And then Article 19. Any issues? Okay. Okay. Well, good is we got more that we agree on than we don't, and so we don't have to address any of those. So what I'll do is I'll go to the first disputed one, and then if you want, Madam Chair, if you want to leave discussion on that.
I have first discussion on page 1. I have Article 3. What do you have, Article 3?
Yeah,
or do you
3C,
slip over to
yes.
C?
3C.
So, yeah. Article 3C, yes. So, issue policy, advisory, and resolution reports, assessing allegations of misconduct by MMPD, recommendations to agencies involved in public safety and administration of justice. I believe this was Ms. Lewis.
The comma issue.
Comma, yeah.
Actually, I don't blame that on Ms. Lewis. I was the one who raised this.
Yeah, he
Minor-
raised it,
minor
and
issue.
And
I think it just needs at least a conjunction in there.
it's a quote from the charter provision.
Is it?
Yeah.
I think.
But I
can
still
still
don't,
go
but
onward.
I'm fine with
Here-
putting in make.
Well, here's what I think it really needs, is it needs an Oxford comma, meaning a comma after the words public safety, because we're issuing policy advisory and resolution reports, comma, recommendations, comma, no, that's not right either.
Recommendations
To the agency
are about
involved,
administration.
public
Yeah.
safety, comma, and the administration. So comma.
But see, in the legal language, you're not supposed to use that comma, is what I've been told when you're writing laws and bylaws.
The Oxford.
The Oxford comma
No,
is a no-no. I've tried to die on this hill before.
So Bob,
Well, I guess the
can you
difference
have
is-
issue policy and issue recommendations?
I think the difference is we're only taking part of the language from the charter.
Yeah,
Because there's
definitely.
a third thing
Yeah,
there.
absolutely,
Which is
which
where you
is
pick up
separate,
the and.
which was separate.
Yeah, which is where you pick up the and.
Right.
So I think it would not do violation to the charter if you stuck an and
Okay.
before recommendations, and then I think it reads just fine.
Good, perfect.
Okay.
There we go.
Yep.
Bingo. Does that need a motion?
No,
I'm just playing.
I think as long as, yeah, I think that's good. I think it now gets added to the non-disputed
Yep.
piece.
Okay.
Okay, section G is the next one I have circled. Conduct public hearings. I won't read it all here, but I believe that's Ms. March.
Yes, and so I just wanted to maybe talk about considering the wording of the public hearings, and I did hear what Mr. Sweeney said about how he described hearings, and though that may be clear to us that are at the table after hearing his explanation, I'm just wondering if we want to use a different word than public hearings, because that was one of the concerns about a board, COB, from the opposition, is that it would work like a tribunal, like a court, and deny people due process, and I just maybe we should have discussion about using the word public hearing. Is my question.
Thank you, Mr. Martinez.
When anything we do though as a board is public anyway, so if we use, I don't know.
What if we just say conduct public meetings instead of hearings?
Or is the intent here to get comment from the
That's
public?
less inflammatory.
Yeah,
Because
public
everything,
hearing.
as you say, everything we do is a public hearing.
Right.
Absolutely.
Town hall.
Ms.
Well,
Hildred?
it's.
Oh, one moment, let's go in
Yep,
order.
yep,
Ms.
sorry.
Hildred?
Yep.
So I'd like to suggest that this may be something we can address with the definition sections up front. That public hearings may include, but not limited to, town hall meetings, just opportunities to talk, et cetera, and talk about the broader. I'd like to urge us to leave the broadest possible language of public hearings in there, because it gives us the ability to be agile and respond to something that we didn't anticipate. If this is the only place where the people can have a voice, or we can give people a voice.
We also have community forums in that sentence too. So yes, I do like the idea of addressing that in the definition section. I do like that idea, just to clarify.
And we can just say including but not limited to, and then that doesn't nail it down.
Any other comments or discussion here?
I think that takes it off the.
Resolved?
I think that's good.
Okay, J is the next one I have. J, and I believe Mr. Dickinson, you wanted to leave that.
Yeah, let me discuss a little bit about this. So, this is something that I would invite Ms. Hall to come up and talk with me about this, if she would. The issue being that every other board and commission, of which there, as she told us, there are 70 of, have the authority to do the hiring and firing for the executive director. None of them have attempted to do this with more than the executive director for some practical reasons that I'd like her to explain.
Sure.
Do you also want to say that after we've had healthy discussions, I mean, this is something that we really batted around quite a bit, both with legal and with HR, with a few different minds. So I would say that Alex and I both agree that we strongly recommend that the COB keep the hiring and firing components just to the executive director and not to the other civil service employees of the department, no matter where you draw that line, which is one of my first concerns. So, and this is more of a concept. This also kind of ties not only to J, but then also under Article 8. So if you'll indulge me just conceptually so I can move you all along on your much bigger items. Civil service employees have a whole host of regulations that govern their employment terms, right? Everything from corrective action to verbal written reprimands to how they have to operate in their department. All of those rules apply to everyone except the executive director. The executive director works for you at will. While I wouldn't necessarily suggest that you hire or fire her with or without cause, you can. You cannot do that with the others. And there is a reason why other boards and commissions don't do that. So functionally, one, it'd be the civil service rules outline that a lot of these kind of decisions with regard to discipline, corrective action, and termination are governed by an appointing authority. In the civil service rules consistently among all metro departments, 50 plus, which are very heavy board and commission driven, 70 plus, make the appointing authority typically the head of the department, right? So that's myself, it's Ms. Waits, and then that person has to go through the appropriate steps, and there's lots of parameters. I mean, these are 100-page documents that govern kind of the employment terms, and they are applicable to everybody, assistant director down. So in that case, for example, if you had an assistant director or senior legal advisor that needed some corrective action because they maybe did something they should not have done within their purview or duties, or needed just corrective action or a verbal reprimand, it would require that this be publicly conducted. You'd have to convene a meeting and then publicly go through that process. It only steps up from there. Written reprimands, performance evaluations, and I'll be honest with you, with the exception of a handful of folks that do something grave in order to end their employment with us in accordance with those civil service rules, typically these are missteps along the way and typically require quite a bit of documentation, as these people are either making missteps because they're not quite right for the job or they're having challenges in the workplace. These are things that you do not want to have in public forums. You do not want to have in televised meetings. So, and you're going to have to go through that process. You can't simply say, look, you've made an error in judgment and now we terminate you. That person would likely appeal that termination, go through the ALJ process with our Civil Service Commission, and I watch those trends. Typically, they're going to get overturned unless they are well documented and well founded. The other thing is that with an executive director, you really want to empower that person to be able to run the administrative functions of the department, which is another reason why you don't want to mess with that structure. If there's a question, if you become the appointing authority for hiring and firing, and I'm the executive director of the COB, and Alex is my senior legal advisor, and he reports hiring and firing to the COB, and I say, hey, Alex, administratively, we need to get this, this, and this done. He can say, I don't report to you. That's not the place you want to be. It also can create some power jockeying among the three positions you're talking about. I'm also concerned about the fact that they're all civil service, and then where are we magically drawing the line that these three are subject to, to COB, or these two are subject to COB, but the other civil service components are not. Now I'm an investigator and saying, well, I don't really like what the executive director is saying. I'm going to go position enough members on the COB to say, you know what, I want to report to you too. And now you've got complete mutiny. So there's a reason why nobody does this. I also think that the executive director, you're empowering that person to make kind of those employment decisions swiftly and appropriately on your behalf. You get one neck to choke. That person is the person at will to you. And they're going to be able to work through much more expeditiously a process if there's someone who does not, either needs corrective action, needs discipline, or hopefully we avoid termination. I also worry about fundamentally if if for some reason we did decide that some folks were going to be subject to COB that were civil service, that as that process played out in front of the COB in public meetings that are televised and open to the public, whether or not once those people, I don't know that you'd ever have to terminate their employment. I'd probably, if I was subject to that, say, see you later. And I think we would have retention and likely recruitment issues beyond that, because I don't know if folks are going to want to be subjected to that. So there's a whole host of issues that made me terribly uncomfortable with that approach. And I really want you guys to be effective. I want you to be swift. And I want you to be able to work through a person that can empower and do the things you need them to do. But with the executive director reporting to you, I feel like you can empower him or her to swiftly make the decisions that reflect the board with regard to personnel.
And these are things I wanted to ask Shannon to come here for, because when you're writing the bylaws, the law is one thing, but how it plays out in practice is something that none of you all would know, something I wouldn't know, frankly. And so it's helpful, I feel like, for the board to hear how the issues that this might create unintentionally.
Can I mention something? So under the section 2.222 of the Metro Code, it outlines about the Board of Ethical Conduct, and there's a provision in there that says that Metro employees are actually subject to the ethical regulations or authority if they're appointing authority, as Ms. Hall's explaining to you. And so there is a Board of Ethical Conduct that does govern board and commission members, elected officials, and it would actually position this board to become also a separate Board of Ethical Conduct for any ethical complaints that you might receive for a person who, if you were in the position of being the appointing authority.
Mr. Sweeney.
Yeah. Just by way of background on the concept of this, it was all going back to, again, the fact that we're just being constituted. We don't know who the executive director is. We don't have any history or ability to rely on their judgment yet because we don't know them. That these are the three people who are key to what we do. As Mr. Dickerson has shown, we rely on counsel a lot on matters, and that's kind of a direct relationship to the board. And therefore, it's really important that the thought process was that it was important to have a direct kind of role between the board and these three people. Now, as a practical matter, it might not be doable, and it might not be the way that it should be structured, but that was the concept for making these three people separate from everybody else. So these two non-civil service people of high responsibility dealt with separately from the others.
Thank you. But, Ms. Hilger, I'm going to call on you. I want to point out we are 10 minutes to 7 p.m. And so I'd like to think about how we might be able to proceed here. And I know we have a heavy agenda for our next meeting, but we certainly are going to get through these next 8 pages here in 10 minutes here. So what are our options? I'm asking collectively and thoughtfully here. You're welcome to come to my house, but not Nashville, and not those cameras there either. But you tell me what you think we should do.
I mean, I think you survived this long without bylaws. We can continue this to another time. But no matter what, we did a ton of great work, and we're in a better position. I can certainly update with what we've chosen so far. Send you another red line, and then maybe probably not the next meeting because that's going to be a lot of stuff. But think about doing it on the agenda after that.
Yeah. Ms. Hilger.
Thank you. Just to finish this thought then, one compromise may be to use the power of our Rules and Policy Committee to establish a rule that the executive director shall complete a annual performance review with special emphasis for these two positions. And then we may want to give some guidance as to how we want to see that happen, so that the responsibility still stays with the executive director in the rules that Ms. Hall has so eloquently explained to us, but we still we can assess and keep the ED accountable for that. We sort of did something like that through human relations and found it very effective.
Mr. Cooper.
If I could follow up, so I appreciate very much your comments. I take to heart everything you said. Perhaps in the spirit of the way that this section of the bylaws is drafted, we might consider a substitute language here that tracks the language of the charter and says that the duties include ensure that the board is fully operational and staffed by sufficient members of personnel in order to promptly, competently, thoroughly carry out its duties. And that way we preserve the authority but not draft it in such a way that we are tying ourselves to the specific power.
You know, another idea that Alex and I had discussed that could be also a part of a middle ground is that maybe through the Rules Committee, there could be a Community Oversight Board representative that sat on the interview panel for those two positions to really help give a voice. And that could be rotating. It's something similar we do when we procure benefits, for example. We allow one board member, and it can rotate any time based on interest or schedule, to sit and be an advisory on our procurement process for medical benefits or dental benefits. But it could be the same where you could have a rotating member that anytime you are hiring, obviously COB will be selected by the full board, but for the other two positions, you could have a member of the COB sit on the interview panel with the executive director.
Okay. Anything else pertinent to this, Mr. Campbell-Gooch?
Can I say one non-controversial thing? And I just noticed it's Article 7, and if I don't say it down, I'll forget. Article 7, Section 3, has A, B, C, D, D. There's two D's. I don't think anybody's going to argue about that.
No, not at all.
I want to end on a happy note.
Yes. I also want to say, since we had talked a little about a definition section, I didn't know if the Rules Committee. First of all, I guess I'm trying to figure out, is the Bylaws Committee defunct and the Rules Committee's taking that over? And should one of these groups look at a definition section to prepare between now and the next meeting?
I viewed the Bylaws Committee as still in existence.
Okay.
And separate from the Rules Committee.
I can endorse that.
No, you're not on it.
So I guess the question is, would the Bylaws Committee want to meet and I'd be happy to join you all if you want to do that, to go over some definitions.
Sure. Can I join the Bylaws Committee?
Sure.
Great.
Welcome.
I mean, I'm fine with that. I
Do
can't
you
decide that, but
want to
yes.
join to just appear, or do you want to be able to vote? Because if so, we just need to. We take a vote to appoint you.
I mean, I just want to offer some help. So I mean, to
So
vote.
let's take a motion then.
Yeah.
I moved that Mr. Campbell-Gooch be added to the Bylaws Committee.
Second.
Any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? No. Abstentions? Mr. Campbell-Gooch, welcome to the Bylaws Committee.
I appreciate that. Before we get out of here, just to close, I do want people to kind of brainstorm how we deal with outside forces trying to influence this group. I was made aware by some community members that some of our people on this board were being harassed social media wise and other things like that. So I think we just need to kind of build an apparatus around how do we navigate those situations, because I can't let you know what's going on with me without triggering public meetings, but I need to get that message to you at some point in time. I'm just laying it out there for further discussion.
Can I speak on that?
Let me call Mr. Ross first, and then
I just
Mr.
want to clarify because
I can clarify. And I think the brother was about to speak on it, Mr. Walter Holloway right here, but somebody notified me that some attention was driven his way as far as just on Facebook and on social media.
Okay.
And I think the brother handled it well, but I think we can get out in front of that now because that's an example of somebody from outside this board trying to influence. Or come at one of our members.
Mr. Holloway.
Well, I deal with the same way I did when I came in the police department.
Absolutely.
Stand up like a man.
For sure.
Deal with it.
For sure. And I know as far as the brother handled it well, but if somebody was to come at me like that, my community members would have to be managed in a totally different way. And so I think if we get out in front of that, we can kind of curtail some of that pressure that some of us may be feeling outside of this board.
Yes, let's add it to our next, I say regular meeting. And in the interim here too, I think this is only our third meeting, but as much as possible, we should stand to want to support and be a resource to one another. I think this is the perfect space to offer that space. You know, the rules, I get the rules and the laws keep us from being able to share. You know, I can't text Ms. Hildreth and go, are you getting this? But I also don't want us to be muted so much that we are suffering, right? Because we need to be our best selves on this board. So let's figure that out. Absolutely. Ms. Ross.
I just see in his responses, people are confused between community oversight board and community oversight now.
Right.
So I don't know how that clarification can get into the public eye. And that's very much confusion.
Yeah. I think that's, and one of the things on my short list, you know, once we have the ED here is, and I was going to talk to Marcus and others about this, but I think as much as possible, we have to stand up our own, external facing, I don't know what that looks like. And we have a website, but it's really for right now just for like posting the agenda and the minutes. But I think you're right. The more we have our name and our language out there, and it's not to say that we aren't in strong agreements, in a lot of space, but I think you're absolutely correct. That there's some confusion because I've had some messages come my way, and I think you're meaning to send this over here. But thank you for your energy. It's what I've been talking about. It's my DC in me. Mr. Sweeney.
Well, the question about exchanging information brings up a question that I've talked with Mr. Dickerson about some, and I'd appreciate it if he could inform us the next meeting where we have time to talk. Okay? I'm not trying to play lawyer. I don't read the public records laws as preventing information being shared. If there's not an ask to take an action, no deliberation, that I think that information can be shared. And I think that it's important to have effective ways of sharing information when information needs to be exchanged before meetings, purely on the basis of what's going on. And so I would appreciate some guidance as clear as possible to either say, no, you're absolutely wrong, you just can't do that, or to give us guidance as to what are the parameters of what we can do as far as sharing information.
You can do that.
Thank you. Okay, so we are tabling the bylaws conversation to our next full and regular meeting, which is likely going to be April 9th. The board is open to it. I know we talked about going to our monthly schedule in the month of April, but considering the special nature of the March meeting, I think we need to give ourselves one more bi-weekly meeting, and then we can move forward. To that same end, and I'm going to speak quickly here, thank you for filling out the doodle poll. I want to share with you that we actually had a virtual tie in 2 days. Thanks so much, folks, for the tie. But I plan to send out a second doodle because there were some folks who marked like, hey, I can do this if there's no other choice, right? But I want to share with you where we are. So the fourth Wednesday of every month and the first Thursday of every month were the two that went out. For that fourth Wednesday of every month, Mr. Martinez and Ms. Ross, I know you had selected those as an X there. If that changes at all and you have some flexibility in that space, let me know, because that would change the vote. And then also that was for the fourth Wednesday of every month. That's where I saw that the two of you had an X there.
Oh, so that was asking for in availability, not our availability?
No, I'm asking about your availability attendance.
If I marked an X, I was available.
Oh, then you need to take that doodle again. Throwing the whole darn panel.
I did it on my phone.
Okay, so if that's the case, then we will start to have our meetings the fourth Wednesday of every month. Sir? starting April, and that'll give us 2 meetings in the month of April. So we'll have the April 9th, and then we'll meet in the 4th Wednesday of that month, and I'll share those dates out. Ms. Ross.
Just to clarify, for our next meeting, I am doing the interview process, reviewing process. I think that we may need to look at starting a little earlier to give us enough time, so I don't know if anybody can do that, but
Yes.
I'm suggesting maybe we start an hour or two earlier.
Right. Yeah, that's the last piece on my agenda. 2 items. One, to ask if everyone's open to us beginning our meeting at 2 p.m. on March 26th. Yes, Mr. Martinez? Yeah. Is there anyone that can't make that happen just for this one meeting?
I can't, but you'll still have a quorum.
And when would you be able to join us? Could you come at 3 or?
Yes.
Okay. Okay. How about we start at 3 o'clock then? I'd like everyone to be there for the full interview of these candidates, so that you can make an informed vote. So we'll do a 3 o'clock start for our next meeting. I also just want to get everyone's consensus here. I'd like to move the next meeting back to the Metro Courthouse so that we don't have any issues with timing, and we also just have a controlled space, and unless for some reason it's not available, but let's just plan for that, and then we can continue the community tour. Does that work for everyone? Okay. All right. With that, I'll accept a motion. Any new business, anything that is urgent or anyone like to discuss? Apologies. I don't want to skip over that. It's important.
No, real quick, I kind of already talked about it with the board. Those members of the community that came in today were my violence interruption team. And so we've been doing canvassing at 37208, meeting with business members. So if anybody knows anyone who works, lives, or serves in 37208, we would love to get a chance to sit down with them so they can know our face and see us, because once the summer hit, we'll be in all mixes.
Great. It's fantastic. Thank you. Ms. Magooch, I'll accept a motion to adjourn.
Motion.
All right.
Seconded.
Seconded. All, any discussion? Guess y'all don't want to talk about that. All in favor? Aye. Opposed, nay. Motion carries. Thank you very much, everyone.
This has been a service of the Metro Nashville Network. If you would like to see this presentation again, or for more information about this and other programs, visit nashville.gov.